Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 20 true stories of missing people from Texas disappearances so chilling they'll make you question what's real and what's hiding just beyond the edge of the light. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. It was the kind of hot that felt like it came from underneath you instead of above. The concrete radiating heat even after the sun had disappeared behind the pine trees that framed the old town. Nacogdoches in July doesn't cool down. It sweats through the night like a body with a fever. That Thursday evening had the kind of stillness that made you think something was holding its breath, and maybe it was. 11-year-old Marley Jackson had asked her mama if she could walk to the dollar, save her around the corner. Said she wanted a Big Red and a bag of sour straws. Just 10 minutes, she promised. Her mama, exhausted after a double at the nursing home, waved her off with a reminder to be back before dark. Marley never was the kind to wander. She was careful, shy even, the sort of girl who always looked both ways twice, held doors open for elders, and said, "Ma'am," even when she didn't have to. The store sat on the edge of a parking lot that had more cracks than pavement, the white lines long since faded to ghost gray. Behind it, a small alley led to an overgrown lot with a rusted-out freezer, piles of broken pallets, and a wire fence sagging like tired shoulders. Not much traffic, not much light. The employees parked in front, and the back was just a forgotten space where trash blew in circles and cats fought over bones. That's where they found her trail the next morning, when the sun came up and Marley's mother realized her daughter's 10 minutes had stretched into hours, and no one could remember seeing her come home. The first cop on the scene said, "It didn't feel like a runaway. Her purse was behind the store, not far from the freezer. Her soda, unopened, lay sideways in the dirt. There was one shoe, a pink Converse high top, scuffed at the toe, resting neatly like someone had taken it off with care. There were no signs of struggle, no drag marks, no blood. But there were scratches in the wall, small, shallow, like fingernails. Had scraped in panic, 5 of them, short and spaced like a child's hand. The security camera above the loading dock had stopped recording at 8:42 p.m., exactly 2 minutes after Marley was last seen in the checkout line. The tape glitched and froze on a single frame. Her face, tilted back slightly, staring up at something just beyond the camera's view. Her mouth was half open, not in a smile, not in fear, just caught in a moment that no one would ever be able to explain. Behind her was the door. It never opened. No one else passed through. But she never walked back out the front either. It was like the building swallowed her whole. Locals began talking, as they always do in small towns, where everyone knows everyone and nothing stays secret for long. They said it reminded them of the Jenkins boy in '92, who disappeared while taking out the trash behind the same store. Said he was never found either. The details were eerily similar. One shoe, a twisted piece of clothing, scratches on the wall. But the Jenkins case had been buried under years of dust and grief, dismissed as an abduction gone cold. Now it was back. Now people were remembering. Now mothers were gripping their children's hands tighter in the parking lot. Refusing to let them stray more than a few feet from sight, the town put up flyers, canvassed neighborhoods, brought in search dogs that sniffed and whined but never barked. They led officers to the alley, circled the freezer once, and then sat down, confused, as if they'd lost the scent entirely. One dog wouldn't stop staring at the back wall, where the bricks looked slightly darker, damp even though it hadn't rained in 3 days. The handler said something wasn't right. The dog wouldn't eat for days after. Wouldn't go near the alley again. By the third night, someone spray-painted a makeshift memorial on the back wall. "Come home, Marley." Candles flickered in old jelly jars, stuffed animals wilted in the heat, and the whispers grew louder. Some said they saw shadows move back there, ones that didn't belong to people. Others said they heard a child humming when no one was around. A few of the high school kids dared each other to go behind the store at night. Most came back laughing, but one boy, Trey Donnelly, was found the next morning sitting in the middle of the parking lot, rocking back and forth. Wouldn't speak for 2 days. When he finally did, he said he saw her. Said Marley looked straight at him from the shadows and smiled. Said her eyes weren't right. The sheriff tried to shut it down. Said too many stories were confusing the investigation. But by then, the town already knew something was wrong with that store. Some folks stopped shopping there altogether. Others, mostly the old-timers, shook their heads and muttered about how the land never took kindly to concrete and metal. That something had been disturbed when they built over what used to be a cemetery, a tiny one from before the war that didn't get moved properly. One old man at the diner swore he remembered bones coming up in the dig. Said his daddy told him not to speak of it. Said the ground never forgets being stolen. 1 week after Marley vanished, her mama stood at the edge of the alley just before dawn. She held a flashlight in one hand and her daughter's favorite sweater in the other. She whispered something only the night could hear, then turned and walked back to her car. The next morning, a maintenance worker found a fresh message on the wall, written in a sticky, dark red that looked like rust but smelled like copper. It read, "I'm not alone down here." Police cordoned off the alley again, brought in specialists. Dug beneath the asphalt. They found nothing. No body, no passage, no evidence of a hidden space. But the camera replaced and upgraded just 2 days before captured something new that night. At 3:17 a.m., the lens caught a single frame of a little girl standing just beyond the edge of the alley, where the light didn't reach. Her face was pale, her shirt torn, her mouth slightly open, and her feet were bare. The timestamp read exactly 1 week since her disappearance. The next frame was blank, then static. Then nothing. The manager quit the following morning. The clerk who checked her out that night moved to Galveston without telling anyone. The alley was eventually sealed with concrete blocks and the backlot overgrown again. The freezer was hauled off and scrapped. But the locals still talk, especially in the summer when the nights are heavy and wet and the cicadas fall quiet all at once. They say you can hear footsteps behind the store, light ones, like a child chasing something just out of reach. They say you might find a small pink Converse sitting in the dirt, always just one, always left neatly behind. And they say if you're there at exactly 8:42 p.m., you shouldn't look at the wall. Because if you do, you'll see her. And she'll see you. And some things don't want to be found. The stretch of Highway 35 between Port Lavaca and Tivoli is as empty and quiet as an old church pew long after service is over. You could drive it 100 times and never notice the squat concrete gas station hunkered just off the shoulder, half sunk into the marshy edge of a long dried creek. The sign is gone, the pumps are rusted out, and the windows have long since clouded over with that filmy mildew Texas humidity leaves behind like a final insult. But if you ask around, really ask, the right people, the ones with old eyes and twitchy hands, They'll tell you not to stop there. Not after dark. And certainly not after 3 a.m. The story always begins the same way, with Dale Carter. Dale wasn't a bad kid. Not by anyone's measure. He worked the late shift at Foster's Fuel and Groceries because he dropped out of high school to take care of his sick mama. And by the time she passed, he was too far behind to catch up. He'd work from sundown to sunrise, stock shelves, refill the ice freezer, clean the bathroom, and pump gas when the occasional driver rolled through. Most folks liked him. Said he had a good memory for names, a habit of singing under his breath, and a lazy smile like someone who'd made peace with being stuck in a nowhere town doing a nothing job. He disappeared on a Wednesday night in June. No storm, no drama, no tire marks. Just gone. His shift ended at 5 a.m. The last receipt printed at 4:42. His truck was still parked out back with the keys on the seat. No blood, no signs of struggle. The place was unlocked, and the station's interior cameras showed him wiping down the counter, sipping from a big red bottle, and occasionally staring out toward the dark pumps like he was waiting for someone. At 4:53 a.m., he stepped outside. He never came back in. That should have been the end of it. Small towns are like that. People vanish, and the dirt just rolls over like a dog hiding a bone. Maybe he wandered out into the marsh, drunk or delirious. Maybe he got picked up by someone, or maybe he finally decided to leave. No note, no leads. Case cold. But then, 3 days later, the pump rang up a charge at 3:15 a.m. That wouldn't have raised eyebrows, except the pump hadn't worked in over a year. The circuit breaker for it was shut off. Everyone knew that. The nozzle had been zip-tied to the handle because it dripped like a bad habit, but the register blinked to life all the same. 4 gallons, paid in cash. No security footage, just a static loop of camera 2 where it always froze, right around 3:10 a.m. Normally it showed the sidewalk and one of the gas islands. That morning, the monitor played something else. It was Dale, standing beside pump 2, holding the nozzle. The image is grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. He wears the same wrinkled blue button-down and greasy khakis he vanished in. The Foster's logo on his cap is tilted slightly right. He's pumping gas into a car the camera doesn't show. And then, just before the loop stutters and resets, he looks straight up at the lens and smiles. Not a broad grin. Not a ghostly smirk. Just a tired, familiar smile like he always gave regulars when they filled up and asked if the coffee was still fresh. The night clerk, a college kid from Goliad, saw it first. She swore up and down that she hadn't touched the switchboard. Hadn't even noticed the feed had resumed until the pump rang up the charge. She quit the next morning. By the end of the week, the loop had become a thing. Teenagers drove out after midnight, parked with their brights off, and dared each other to walk to the pumps. Most just laughed it off, another small-town ghost story. But a few came back wrong, not hurt, exactly, just quieter. Eyes glassy like something burned behind them. One kid, Danny Del Toro, stood in front of the mirror in the school bathroom for 4 hours, whispering the same phrase over and over. He smiled at me like he knew. They had to pull the breaker on the cameras altogether. That didn't stop the loop. Sheriff McAllen yanked every feed, every plug, every hard drive. They still caught Dale on tape the next night, 3:15 sharp, smiling up at the lens. Eventually, they bulldozed the station. That should have been the end of it. But last spring, a trucker named Curtis Bale broke down about a mile from the old site. Called dispatch at 2:48 a.m. Said he saw lights up ahead and figured it was some rural gas stop he hadn't noticed before. The dispatcher told him there wasn't anything for 10 miles in either direction, but Bale swore someone had waved him in. He walked the rest of the way. Came back hours later barefoot, sunburned, incoherent. Told the EMTs there was a boy pumping gas in the fog. Said the air reeked of oil and mildew and something older. Said the boy never spoke, just handed him a bottle of Big Red and pointed toward a pump that didn't exist. Bailed down the soda, then blacked out cold. The strangest thing? His rig was topped off, tank full, no charge on his card. But his dash cam, while mostly static, caught one frame. Dale Carter. Pump 2, smiling. After that, the stories picked up again. People passing by swore they saw a flicker of light around the place where the gas station used to be. Some described the faint squeal of rubber on concrete. Others said they caught a glimpse of a boy leaning against a rusted-out signpost, drinking something red from a bottle, staring out into the highway like he was waiting for someone. One woman, a nurse driving back from Corpus, claimed she stopped without meaning to, like her body moved on its own. When she came to, the driver's door was open and she was holding a folded receipt that read, 4.0 gal $0, come back anytime. They had no way to explain that. The receipt paper had the old Foster's logo, the kind they hadn't printed in over a decade. Her palms smelled like diesel. Nobody goes near that stretch anymore. Not if they can help it, but if you ever find yourself alone on Highway 35, somewhere between the marsh and the fog, and you see a flickering light in the distance, drive past it. Don't slow down. Don't look toward the shoulder. And for God's sake, if you hear the click of a gas nozzle or the shuffle of footsteps outside your car door, keep your eyes on the road. Because it's always 3:15 a.m. out there, and he's always waiting, still smiling. They came up the river trail in the early hours of Friday morning, right after the heat broke, but before the air remembered how to breathe. 3 of them, all under 30, loaded down with ultralight packs and the kind of confidence you only carry when you've never seen a man drown or bleed out. Daniel, Jake, and Lena, friends since now scattered between Houston and Austin, still trying to keep their once-a-year pact of one wild weekend before life swallowed them whole. Devil's River had been Jake's idea, a remote stretch of twisted limestone and bleached gravel, with no phone signal and barely marked trails, hemmed in by thorn brush and cliffs that didn't give second chances. Jake said it was perfect. Daniel brought a flare gun. Lena brought a journal she never got to finish. They signed in at the trailhead like everyone else, scratching their names into the dusty ledger inside the ranger station the way you might write a message on the inside of a time capsule. The ranger that morning was a gaunt man with sun-faded patches on his sleeves and skin like old leather. His name tag said Willis. He barely looked at them. Just muttered something about the heat and not staying too close to the riverbanks at night. Jake cracked a joke, something about river monsters, and Willis didn't laugh. Didn't smile. Just stared at them for a second longer than comfort allowed, then tapped a bony finger against a faded warning taped to the desk. The paper was brittle and curled at the corners, but the red ink stood out like dried blood. Do not camp within 300 yards of the vanishing point. Area closed due to unstable ground and wildlife activity. Lena asked what the vanishing point was. Willis just shrugged. A name folks gave that bend in the canyon. Strange things happen there. Then he handed them a trail map with the vanishing point, circled 3 times in black marker. They made it about 8 miles the first day. The sun was cruel, even in late October, and the river ran low, just a shallow trickle winding through a bed of polished stone and rust-colored boulders. They stopped to rest near a series of limestone shelves around midday, snapping photos and skipping flat rocks into pools that smelled faintly of copper and rot. Lena wrote in her journal while the guys argued about whether scorpions glow blue under blacklight. They saw no one else. That night, they set camp well past the marked perimeter, closer to the river than they should have been. Jake found a spot near a narrow chute of stone where the water hissed through a natural siphon. He said it felt vibey and untouched. Daniel lit the first fire, and they roasted jerky on skewers and passed around a flask until the stars came out. Lena wrote by headlamp. She wrote that Jake was brave and Daniel was thoughtful, and that maybe she'd stop pretending she didn't want more from one of them, maybe both. She wrote that the rocks around them had strange burn patterns and that the cicadas went quiet. For exactly 11 minutes around 10:23 p.m., she drew circles in the margins. Overlapping circles. The flare went up just before dawn. Other hikers, miles away, reported it. One red burst in the pale sky, too low to be mistaken for anything, but a signal. Rangers reached the site by noon. What they found was unclear. The official report, which took nearly a month to release, stated there were no signs of foul play, but also no sign of the hikers. None of their gear remained. The tent was gone, the cooking grate, the headlamps, and boots. What was left was a ring of scorched rock, as if a second, more violent fire had come after the one they'd made. At the center of that ring was a melted fragment of a flare casing embedded in blackened stone. And to the south, near the tree line, a single hiking shoe half filled with gravel. The shoe's laces were still tied. Ranger Willis was the first one on scene. The younger ranger who accompanied him, Daniels, said the old man went rigid when they crested the bluff and saw the scorched clearing. Stood there for 10 full minutes without speaking. Then, without looking at Daniels, Willis turned around, walked back to the Jeep, and never came back to work. He wouldn't return calls, wouldn't answer the door. Eventually, someone reported him missing. Inside his trailer, rangers found his uniform folded on the couch and every mirror covered with aluminum foil. There was a short message scrawled on the back of his trail map, just one sentence. They don't leave when the fire dies. There's been speculation. UFOs, cults, gas pockets ignited by sparks. But there are things that don't sit right with any of the theories. Like the char patterns, which experts said didn't match any known fire behavior. Or the shoe, which showed no signs of tearing, as if the foot had simply evaporated from inside it. Or the journalina's journal, which was mailed anonymously to her sister in Pflugerville 2 weeks later, with no return address and no postage. Just showed up one morning, sitting perfectly upright on her doorstep. Dry despite 2 nights of rain. Her sister said the last page had been torn out. Not cleanly, but ragged, like someone ripped it with shaking hands. She said the rest of it made less and less sense the deeper you read. By the end, Lena had stopped using words entirely. Just those same circles, drawn over and over again, until the ink bled through and the paper felt soft and pulpy, like skin. She said the last sentence Lena wrote before the page was torn said, "Jake keeps walking to the water, but there's no reflection. Just another Jake looking back." Since then, hikers have stayed clear of the vanishing point. The trail maps don't label it anymore. Some GPS apps mark the coordinates as a dead zone, though no one seems to know who programmed it that way. Rangers still get calls, mostly from people hearing screams near that river bend or flashes of light at night. Sometimes they go investigate. Most times they don't. But if you ask one of the older rangers off the record, somebody who's been there long, enough to know the stories, they'll tell you not everything in those hills sleeps when the sun comes up. They'll tell you some places take people. Not out of malice, not even hunger, just out of something older. Something that doesn't understand the difference between now and before. Something that's always been there, waiting. One ranger retired now. Lives near Del Rio. He swears he saw Lena last spring. Swears he was driving up Farm Road 864 around dusk when a woman in trail gear stepped out of the brush. Said her pack was brand new but covered in ash. Said her eyes looked empty, like the night sky without stars. She didn't ask for help, didn't speak. just pointed back the way she'd come, toward the river. Before stepping off the road and disappearing again, he didn't stop, just kept driving. Didn't even tell anyone until months later, but every so often on those dry and windless nights, when the cicadas go quiet all at once, a flare still rises above Devil's River, low, red, faint, like someone's still out there trying to come back. Or maybe trying to warn the rest of us to stay the hell away. The morning fog was thicker than usual, curling low across the Archer County plains like smoke from a slow-burning fire, clinging to the barbed wire fences and the brittle husks of last season's sorghum. It was the kind of fog that made the yellow school bus look ghostly as it creaked along the old farm-to-market road that cut through the middle of nowhere. The ride from the rural cluster of trailer homes known as Bell Branch to the elementary school in Hollis wasn't long. Barely 15 miles, but that stretch had always felt like no man's land half forgotten by the county and barely kept. On the map by rusted road signs peppered with shotgun holes, Miss Carpenter drove the route every weekday morning at 6:15 a.m. sharp. She'd been doing it for nearly 17 years, and her hands gripped the steering wheel with a quiet steadiness. That came from years of navigating slick gravel curves and watching for stray deer or cattle in the road. She was the kind of woman who wore her hair in a tight bun and didn't tolerate foolishness, but the kids liked her. She gave out caramel chews on Fridays and kept a cassette deck that only played gospel and 70s country. That Friday morning, something felt off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way the fog swallowed up the beams of her headlights, turning them into hazy cones of yellow that seemed to fall short of the pavement. Maybe it was the silence. Usually, birds would call from the live oaks or a dog would bark as she rolled past a farmhouse. But that morning, the only sound was the soft rumble of the diesel engine and the occasional rattle of the bus frame as she turned toward the first stop. Doc Eli and Nora were usually the first kids on. Their trailer sat back off the road behind a sloping fence and a rusted satellite dish half swallowed by weeds. Miss Carpenter blinked twice at the empty drive. Number. Porch light. No motion. She honked twice, waited. Nothing. That was odd, but maybe they overslept. She shrugged and kept going. One by one, stop after stop, she was greeted with the same eerie stillness. No porch lights. No little faces bundled in oversized jackets running to the bus steps. No parents waving half-heartedly from doorways with coffee mugs in hand. Just fog and fences and the sound of her own breathing. Still, Miss Carpenter pressed on, convinced it was just a strange coincidence. 17 stops. 17 no-shows. Her last pickup was off a gravel turnoff that led down to an abandoned oil field easement. That's where Jacob and his cousin Riley lived in a sun-faded, double-wide perched on cinder blocks, but when she turned off the main road, the fog thickened into something that didn't feel quite natural. The trees looked taller than they should have been. The grass on the sides of the road had this bluish tint, wet with dew but unnaturally still. The bus's headlights bounced strangely, like they were hitting something invisible in the air, and just as she rounded a bend, she saw them. 18 kids, standing in a row, silent, all facing her. Except these weren't her kids. They looked like children, sure. Small bodies, backpacks, bright coats. But there was something too still about them. Their faces pale and distant, like masks made of wax, and their eyes too black, too deep. Miss Carpenter's foot hovered above the brake. Every instinct she had told her not to stop, but her hands were frozen on the wheel. The bus didn't slow. It didn't swerve. It rolled straight ahead. When the front bumper passed through the first child, Miss Carpenter finally screamed. But it wasn't a scream of fear, it was confusion, because the child didn't flinch, didn't move. didn't even ripple like mist. It was like she passed through a photograph, one that flickered and vanished the moment the bus rolled beyond it. She slammed the brake and twisted around in her seat, heart hammering like a drum in her ears, expecting to see them still standing behind her. But the road was empty, just gravel, trees, and the thick, unbroken fog curling through the woods. That was the last time anyone saw the school bus. Later that day, when it failed to arrive at the school, calls were made. Parents, already frantic from waking up late to find their children gone without explanation, began crowding the sheriff's office. Sheriff Doyle organized a search party by noon. Volunteers and trucks fanned out across Archer County's back roads. Drones were sent over pastures, helicopters circled the hollows and creek beds. Nothing. No tracks. No skid marks, no twisted metal, no scent trail for the dogs. Not even heat from the engine. It was as if the bus had just driven off the edge of the world. They called in the Texas Rangers. Then the FBI. News crews from Wichita Falls and even Dallas arrived, broadcasting from the foggy gravel roads. Archer County's vanishing bus mystery, they called it. The nation watched for weeks. Theories poured in. Cult abduction, gas leak hallucination, mass hysteria. Some even blamed Miss Carpenter, though the old woman had vanished along with the bus and the kids. But none of those theories ever held water. 10 years later, long after the case had gone cold, someone broke into the old records office behind the county courthouse. They left behind nothing except a scrap of paper stuck under the door. No fingerprints, no footprints. Just one sentence, scrawled in shaky handwriting: engine still turns over at 6:15 if the fog is thick enough. Locals began whispering again. Some claimed that on particularly foggy mornings, just before dawn, you could hear the rumble of an old diesel engine on Farm to Market Road 1290. A few said they'd seen the lights, 2 yellow beams cutting through the mist, but when they tried to follow, the road always twisted the wrong way, or their cars would sputter and die. Sheriff Doyle retired the following year and moved to Arizona. Before leaving, he gave a closed-door interview to a local reporter that was never published. The transcript leaked years later. In it, he admitted something he'd never told the public. On the 4th day of the search, a state trooper found tire impressions down by the old easement near the oil field, the same one Miss Carpenter was supposed to take that morning. But there was no bus, no oil, no crushed grass. The tracks simply stopped in a circle, like the bus had idled in place for a while, then vanished. They tested the soil and found elevated electromagnetic readings, high enough to disrupt GPS, radios, even wristwatches. They brought in a geologist who found something strange, a perfectly symmetrical hollow beneath the topsoil, big enough to fit a school bus, as though the ground had been scooped out from beneath and replaced without disturbing the surface. Over time, the theories dried up and the roads were repaved. But Archer County never really forgot. There's a memorial now near the edge of that old road. A rusted school bell mounted on a crooked post. The names of the 18 kids and Miss Carpenter etched into a sheet of tin. Flowers are left there. Sometimes, mostly from out-of-towners passing through. Tourists hoping to see the bus. Or maybe hoping not to. Last fall, a maintenance worker went to repaint the guardrail nearby and found small footprints in the fresh mud 18 sets, some barefoot, some not. All headed into the fog. None came back out. It was the kind of motel you only end up in when you're either running from something or too tired to care. The neon sign buzzed overhead like a dying insect, casting flickering red letters that read vacancy. The paint on the office door was cracked and peeling, and a rusted ice machine groaned in the corner like it hadn't been used in years. But for $38.50 a night, cash only, no questions, no credit. Room 6 was home for a little while. The woman checked in just after dusk. Her car was a beat-up silver sedan with Missouri plates and a cracked rear windshield. She signed the register as L. Morrison, no first name, just the initial, and the clerk didn't ask. He was a round-shouldered man who smelled faintly of cigarettes and motor oil and moved like the hours weighed heavy on him. He slid the key across the desk, told her not to use too much hot water, and didn't look up again. The woman didn't have much, just a canvas duffel slung over one shoulder and a half-empty gas station coffee in the other hand. Her face was plain in a way that made her difficult to describe. Brown hair, a little past the shoulders. Eyes that were dark but not quite black. She wore a denim jacket with the collar turned up and boots that clomped on the pavement like she'd walked. A long way before she ever found the car, Room 6 was exactly what you'd expect. Stiff bed, squeaky ceiling fan, burn marks in the carpet, and a bathroom mirror that took up almost the entire wall above the sink. The kind of mirror that made the room feel larger than it was. She stood in front of it for a long time, the door still cracked open behind her, the hallway light casting a sharp triangle across the floor. The first guest to complain was in Room 7. Said he heard something tapping on the wall all night. Not banging or thumping, tapping, like someone drumming their nails, slow and steady. At 2:13 a.m., he knocked on the manager's office, but no one answered. He said later he walked past Room 6 and noticed the door was slightly ajar, but the lights were off. No sound inside except a faint, wet squeaking, like feet on tile. In the morning, the maid found the door wide open. The room looked mostly untouched, bed still made, bag on the chair, key on the nightstand. The coffee cup was in the trash, still half full. No sign of the woman except in the bathroom. That's where things started to go wrong. The mirror above the sink wasn't cracked or broken. It was clean, even shinier than the others in the motel. But right in the middle of it, pressed flat against the glass, were two pale handprints. Not greasy or smudged, not like someone had just leaned against it. These were clearer than they should have been, almost like they were beneath the surface, and they weren't from the maid. Too small. Too flat. Too wrong. The motel manager, Glenn, figured she'd skipped out. Maybe high, maybe running, maybe both. He tossed her bag in the lost and found behind the desk and didn't think much of it until later that week, when a new guest checked into Room 6 and came storming into the office 10 minutes after. "There's someone in the mirror," she said, breathing hard. Not a reflection, just watching. She said the woman looked like she was trying to say something but couldn't move her mouth. Said her hands were flat against the glass, like she was trying to push through. Said her eyes didn't blink. Glenn rolled his own eyes and offered her a different room. But when he walked in to clean up Room 6 himself, he felt it too, that sudden drop in temperature near the bathroom. Like standing in front of an open freezer. The air didn't move, but the light flickered. And when he looked into the mirror, just for a second, he thought he saw someone standing behind him. But when he turned around, the room was empty. That's when he stopped renting out Room 6, covered the door with a cheap plywood sheet, and told guests it had plumbing issues. But things didn't stop. Not entirely. The guests in Rooms 5 and 7 started complaining of strange sounds again, whispering, a woman's voice humming tunelessly through the vents. Sometimes, late at night, the mirror in Room 7 would cloud over with handprints, even when the bathroom wasn't being used. And sometimes, only sometimes, the lights would go out in a single flash, and when they came back on, all the water in the sink would be hot. Scalding. Then came the trucker. He didn't believe in much. Sighed so himself when he rolled into town, hauling drywall down to El Paso. Asked for the cheapest room, didn't mind the stink or the flies. Got room 6 by mistake. Glenn had forgotten to mark it in the book that night. By the time Glenn realized the error, the guy was already inside, brushing his teeth, staring into the mirror. Later, Glenn would swear he heard the scream before the door even slammed shut. A deep, startled yelp followed by a kind of vacuum silence. When he broke down the door with a crowbar, the room was empty. No signs of a struggle. No luggage. No truck keys. The only thing left was a fine layer of steam on the mirror and 2 handprints. Bigger than the first pair. Fresh. The police came and went, shook their heads, took statements they didn't believe. They never found the trucker's rig. The woman's car was still out back, untouched, but the plates had vanished. Like someone had unscrewed them with purpose. Room 6 stayed boarded. After that. But the mirror was harder to ignore. A kid broke in once, some teenager from town who thought the stories were funny. He posted a video online saying he was going to summon the ghost in room 6, dared her to show herself. You can still find the footage. He sets up his phone on the sink, points it at the mirror, stands there grinning. Tells a bad joke about Bloody Mary. Waits at the 5-minute mark. Something shifts. The light buzzes overhead, and in the mirror, just the mirror, his reflection starts to blur. He doesn't notice right away. He's laughing, still talking. But then the reflection freezes. The real kid moves, waves a hand, scratches his neck. But in the mirror, he stands still. Then the reflection smiles. Not a grin. Not his mouth, something wider, sharper, and just before. The phone falls off the sink and the video cuts out. You can hear his voice say, "Who's that?" But he never looks behind him. That was last year. The mirror's still in room 6. Glenn tried to remove it once. Hired a guy with tools and a sledgehammer. But the mirror wouldn't budge. Said it was fused to the wall somehow, like it had melted into the tile. The guy took one look into it and left without asking for payment. Said he saw his wife in it. She'd been dead 7 years. Glenn doesn't touch it anymore. He keeps the door locked with 3 padlocks now. Hasn't stepped into the room in months. But the guests keep hearing the sounds. Tapping. Whispers. Sometimes sobbing. And every once in a while, someone will swear they saw a woman's face in the reflection of the lobby window. Even when no one's in the room with them. No one remembers who Elle Morrison really was. No one knows where she came from. But everyone agrees on one thing. She looked into the mirror and something looked back and it didn't let her go. The Pecos River runs hard and wide through that part of West Texas, cutting deep into the limestone and red clay like a knife dragged slowly through flesh. Locals say it never forgets anything it's taken. Cattle, people, whole wagons, even trains. Once, before the crossing was moved upstream and the new bridge poured in reinforced concrete. The old bridge, what was left of it, had long since collapsed into the canyon below. Just jagged steel ribs jutting out from either side like broken teeth, and rust-eaten rebar tangled like vines around the piers. Nothing had crossed there in over 20 years. Not legally, anyway, but the car was real. A silver Ford sedan, late model, dustless and clean like it had just rolled off a dealer lot, parked dead center at the dead end of the old asphalt road. That led to the ruins of the bridge. No way forward, just sky and canyon and the hiss of wind rising up from the riverbed below. When the county sheriff's deputy first spotted it, he thought it might have been dumped. But there was no damage, no signs of a crash or struggle. The tires weren't flat and the headlights were off. The driver's seat was adjusted for someone tall, judging by how far back it was from the wheel. A pack of spearmint gum lay on the dash, a pair of sunglasses on the console, and the keys just hanging there in the ignition, like whoever had been driving expected to get back in any second. But the strangest part? All 4 doors were locked. from the inside. No one had reported the car stolen. The plates came back registered to a man named Alan Drover from Fort Stockton, a retired school teacher who'd gone missing the day before. According to his wife, he'd left early that morning to drive to Carlsbad, where his daughter had just had a baby. It was supposed to be a straight shot about 2 hours north, all interstate. Nothing should have taken him anywhere near the Pecos. No detours, no scenic routes. But there it was, his car. And not a trace of him. Sheriff Hartley had the thing towed, of course. Sent divers down into the river in case Drover had somehow fallen over the edge, though that didn't explain how he'd locked the car behind him. No body turned up. No clothing snagged on the broken beams. Just silt, catfish, and the quiet churn of a river that looked calm but ran deep and hungry. After 3 days of searching and a full-page write-up in the Pecos Gazette, the whole thing was written off as another West Texas vanishing. They happen more often than folks like to admit. The desert doesn't give back what it takes. But that wasn't the end of it. Not for me. I was the tow driver that hauled Drover's car. I remember the weight of it on the hook too light, like the engine block was missing or something. I remember the heat too, though that's nothing new out there. The sun comes down like judgment. What I can't forget is the smell inside the car. Faint, but wrong. Not rot, not even sweat. Something older? Like the stale, dry musk you find in an old church basement that's been sealed up for years. I mentioned it to the guy at the impound lot, but he just shrugged. I should have let it go, but I didn't. A week later, a second car was found. Same spot, different make and model, this time a red Buick, nose pointed right to the edge like it had coasted there gently. Same story, locked, empty, keys in the ignition. Belonged to a woman named Shirley Pearson from Odessa. A nurse, never made it to her shift. Her family said she was coming down Highway 285, nowhere near the river crossing. Her GPS later showed she'd veered off just past a little place called Orla, taken a dirt road that led nowhere, then ended up at the river. No one knew why. They fenced off the road after that, posted a patrol car at the split, but by then it had already started. 3 more cars were found before the month was out. Different makes, different drivers, no connection between them. One was a preacher. One, a traveling electrician. The third, a trucker whose rig was found jackknifed on the same approach. His cab locked, his logbook still open to a blank page. No blood, no skid marks. Just that same sick hush in the air when you got too close to the edge. I drove past it once more after the 5th disappearance, even though my wife begged me not to. I just needed to see it again. Needed to feel that weird pressure in my skull when I stared down where the bridge used to be. And I did feel it. Like something was waiting. I don't know if it's the river or the canyon, or whatever still clings to the bones of that old bridge. But I started looking into the history, into the maps, the accidents, the floods. Turns out the Pecos crossing had always been a strange place. The Comanche refused to camp near it. Early Spanish records talk about travelers going mad or disappearing during their passage. And in 1932, a school bus supposedly slid off the bridge during a thunderstorm, 12 kids and a driver. No wreckage ever found. The river had risen 30 feet that night, they said, swallowed the whole thing. But there were witnesses, people who swore they heard laughter coming from the canyon 3 days later. Just after dusk, I started dreaming. About it, about the edge. About that moment just before the car hits the brakes, just before the tires roll to a stop, as if the driver wasn't quite in control. As if something was drawing them. The feeling grew stronger over time, and I couldn't shake the sense that I was being pulled too. Every time I tried to sleep, I saw the reflection of taillights hanging in the air above the river, red glows like eyes. And behind them, something darker. Then, last month, I got a call from a buddy on the sheriff's team. Said they'd found another vehicle, but this one was different. An older truck, the kind with a long bed and a camper shell. It wasn't parked near the edge. It was stuck halfway down the canyon wall, lodged in a crumbled runoff gully like it had slid in sideways. When they reached it, the driver's side window was down, the glove box was open, and on the back seat they found a stack of Polaroids. Each one showed a different vehicle, each one matched the cars that had gone missing, all parked in the same position. Nose to the drop. Except in the photos, the drivers were still inside, wide-eyed, staring ahead, mouths open like they were mid-scream. There's no way those pictures could exist, no way anyone could have taken them. And yet they're real. I held one in my hand. The sheriff sealed them up, sent the photos to the FBI, but I don't think that'll help. Whatever's happening at the Pecos crossing didn't start with Drover, and it sure won't end there. The river's too old, the canyon too deep. It remembers things. Maybe it needs them. And now the story's spreading like water seeping through rock. Last night, I heard something outside my house. Tires on gravel, a low engine idle. I live 20 miles from that river, but I swear I saw headlights through my front curtains. Parked at the end of the drive, aimed straight at my door. I didn't go look. I just locked every door, turned off every light, and waited. Morning came. Nothing there. But there were prints in the dust. 4 of them, bare feet, pointed inward, as if someone had just stepped out of the car and come looking. I don't drive past that split anymore. I don't even say the name of the place out loud. But it still comes to me, in dreams and in that subtle tug behind my ribs when I'm driving alone after dark. I know that one day, if I keep ignoring it, I'll wake up behind the wheel. Hands. At 10 and 2. Headlights off. Road humming under my tires. And ahead of me, the edge, waiting. It started with that metallic click and the static hum. Not much else came through for the first few nights after. Claire and Jonah moved into the house on the outskirts of Lulling just a week. Analog buzzed like an old radio stuck between stations. The baby monitor, secondhand from a resale shop in San Marcos, had a soft green glow on its front and a grainy quality to the audio that made Jonah grumble about buying something newer. Claire had waved him off. "It works," she said, cradling their newborn daughter Willa. "Besides, I kind of like the vintage look. Feels comforting." The house was a rental, tucked behind a stand of pecan trees on a sloping plot that backed into dry creekland. It had sat empty for nearly a year, the real estate agent said, which surprised Claire considering how cheap the rent was and how intact everything looked. No busted windows, no graffiti, no animal squatters. Still, the walls seemed to hold a kind of heavy silence, the kind that made clocks tick louder and footsteps echo too sharply. Willa had been colicky since the move, crying most between 1 and 4 a.m., and that's when the baby monitor first started picking up more than static. Claire heard it before Jonah ever did. At precisely 2:19 a.m., 3 nights in a row, a voice crackled through just for a few seconds, a woman's voice. Faint and distant, but unmistakable. "Annie, Annie, come to Mama." It was barely audible through the hiss, but the tone, the gentle pleading, the softness curdling with panic sent a sharp, icy flick along Claire's spine. Willa was asleep in her crib all 3 nights, gurgling and peaceful. There was no one else in the house. Claire didn't mention it to Jonah, right? Away. She wanted to believe it was just interference, maybe a neighbor with an old radio or a scanner or something bouncing off the hills. But they didn't have neighbors close enough for a baby monitor to pick up anything. Their nearest neighbor, was a quarter-mile up the road, a retired mechanic who had a "Don't Tread on Me" flag and 2 dead cars in the front yard. He didn't strike her as the type to have anything resembling a baby monitor dot by the 5th night. Claire stopped. Pretending. She sat up in bed, wide-eyed and waiting. When the clock glowed 2:18, she turned the monitor volume up and stared at the speaker. Chest tight dot at exactly 2:19 a.m. The voice came again, clearer this time, like the source was closer. "Annie, come back inside. Annie, baby, Mama's right here." Claire's skin prickled as she gripped the device. There was a crackling sound, like someone shifting fabric near a mic. Then a soft, almost musical giggle, high and sweet, like a toddler's. But with something off about the rhythm. Claire shook Jonah awake. "Listen," she hissed, shoving the monitor toward him. He blinked, confused, then listened. Another giggle, then the woman's voice again, sharper this time. "Don't go near the fire, Annie. Stay away from the flames." Jonah sat up slowly, his expression hardening as he looked at Claire. "Is this a joke?" "I'm not doing anything," she said, voice trembling. "Willa's asleep. You want to go check?" Jonah got up and crept down the hall to the nursery. He came back after a minute, rubbing his head. "She's out cold. Nothing weird in there. But damn, that voice." He trailed off. They both sat in silence until the signal dropped out at 2:23 a.m. The static stopped altogether, replaced by the soft hum of silence. Claire didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did Jonah. The next day, Claire drove into town and stopped by the library. It wasn't much, 2 rooms and a converted church office, but the librarian was helpful. Claire asked about fires in the area. The woman squinted, then led her to the back room where they kept old microfiche and newspaper clippings. It took an hour of digging, but Claire found it an article from 6 years earlier. "Tragedy on Ranch Road. 1,322. Family of 3 feared dead." In house fire. The photo showed the shell of a house, burned out walls, skeletal beams, blackened trees nearby. Claire stared at it, then glanced at the address. Her heart thud. It was their house. The one she and Jonah were renting now. The article said the fire had started around 2 a.m., a propane leak. The mother was believed to have tried to escape with her daughter but had gone back inside. The girl Annie was never found. Fire crew said she must have been consumed in the blaze. The father's body was found near the front door, severely burned. Claire read the names over and over again. Mother, Helen Prescott. Father, Luke Prescott. Daughter, Annabelle Prescott, age 3. Back home, Claire showed the article to Jonah, who read it 3 times before setting it down slowly. "We need to leave," he said. "I don't care about the lease. I'll pack tonight." Claire agreed. They started boxing things up right away, ignoring Willa's sudden bursts of crying that seemed to come only when the clock crept near midnight. They didn't wait for the weekend or a moving truck. By midnight, the nursery was nearly empty. At 2:18 a.m., the monitor clicked on again. They hadn't unplugged it. Jonah reached for it, but this time, the green light flickered like a heartbeat. Faster and faster, until the speaker screamed with white noise. Then the woman's voice came through louder than ever. "Annie. Annie, no. Don't." A rush of static swallowed the voice, and something slammed hard against the wall in the nursery. Willa shrieked. Claire ran in to find her daughter standing in the crib, not crying, just staring toward the far corner of the room, where the wall was marked by a long, sooty handprint. It trailed down toward the floor. Jonah grabbed the baby, and they left the house by dawn, speeding down the road without looking back. They moved in with Claire's sister in San Antonio while they searched for a new place. Jonah called the rental agency to cancel, but the woman on the line seemed confused. "That property's not in our system," she said. "We haven't had a house listed in that area for over a year." Not since the fire. Claire hung up and checked the lease again. The letterhead was generic, no company name, just an address. When she called the number, it rang until a voice-raspy male answered with a single word, Prescott. She never called again. Weeks passed. Willa started sleeping better. They donated the baby monitor to a thrift store in Austin. That should have been the end of it, but Claire still wakes every night at 2:19. A .m. not from a sound, from silence. The kind that stretches too long. The kind that presses on the ears. The kind that makes you feel like someone is standing just behind you, whispering a name that doesn't belong to your child. And sometimes on the edge of sleep, Claire still hears it. Annie, Annie, come to Mama. And Willa stirs in her crib and smiles. He was just a night shift guy at the Tyson plant on the edge of Plainview, the kind of job nobody dreams of having, but plenty of folks end up taking anyway. His name was Lonnie Traylor, 32, divorced, no kids, not much family to speak. OF. He'd moved to Plainview 6 months prior, looking for a place quiet enough to disappear into and cheap enough to afford on his own. He found a 2-bedroom duplex behind an old gas station off Quincy Street, drove a dented maroon Saturn, with one working window, and kept to himself. No trouble, no fuss. Just a man showing up to work 5 nights a week to watch empty hallways, check ID badges, and make sure the lights stayed on. He wasn't the type to cause a stir. The plant itself had been built in the late 70s, sprawling and boxy with walls the color of concrete rot. It reeked permanently of bleach, sweat, and something faintly metallic, maybe blood from the slaughter floor, maybe just rust soaked deep into the pipes. Most of the workers were long gone by 8 p.m., save for a few janitors and the overnight guards like Lonnie. His job was simple. Walk the north wing twice, log any lights out, make sure the basement doors were secured, and most importantly, stay visible. They had cameras all over. Grainy old things from before HD, but functional enough to keep the insurance company happy. You could always see Lonnie's silhouette moving through the grayish-green static of the monitors, flashlight bobbing in. One hand, clipboard in the other. He always clocked in at 10:02 on the dot and clocked out at exactly 6:01. Like clockwork. Literally dot until that Thursday night in late October dot. It was cold that week, first real snap of the season, and the wind had a bite to it. One of the other guards, a guy named Jeff who covered the east side, said Lonnie had been quieter than usual during the radio check-ins, just answering with clipped phrases. All clear, nothing here, still locked, and then silence. No jokes, no comments about the Cowboys game, none of the usual small talk. But Lonnie wasn't what you'd call chatty in the first place, so nobody really noticed until morning.6 Kelowna 1 came, and the camera feed from the break room showed him standing by the time clock, scanning his badge like always. He looked normal, not rushed, not scared, not tired. Just Lonnie, same old reflective jacket zipped halfway up, gray hoodie underneath, faded jeans, work boots caked with some white powder from the loading bay. He reached up, swiped the badge, then stepped back, arms at his sides like he was waiting for something. The camera held on him. 1 minute passed. Then 2, then 3. He didn't move. The feed started to flicker. That old screen haze you get when the camera lens fogs up or loses focus, but it wasn't the lens. It was the hallway. Behind him, what was bright at first lit with those ugly fluorescent panels in the ceiling started dimming, bit by bit, frame by frame. The lights stayed on, but the hallway looked like it was swallowing itself. Not going dark exactly, but getting deeper. That's the word one of the techs used later. It looked deeper, like the shadows were stretching toward him. And Lonnie just stood there. No one came in. No door opened. No sound. At exactly 6:08, he turned his head slowly toward the hallway. Then, for the first time in all the footage ever taken of him, he looked directly into the camera and smiled. It wasn't a big grin. It wasn't even creepy in the way people like to exaggerate. It was just wrong, like it didn't belong on his face, like someone else had pulled it up by invisible strings. Then he walked backward, not turned around. He walked backward, arms still hanging at his sides, head slightly tilted, eyes locked to the camera the whole time. He stepped backward down that hallway until he was swallowed by it. The shadows swallowed him like water takes a dropped stone. And just like that, he was gone. They searched the plant for 5 days. Every duct, every sub-basement, every access. Hatch, nothing. His locker was untouched, with a clean uniform still hanging inside. His phone and keys were in the top drawer of the security desk. His car sat in the lot with a quarter tank of gas and a melted Snickers bar on the passenger seat. His apartment was locked. Nothing unusual. Not a single sign of violence, no record of mental illness, no girlfriend drama, no debts, no enemies. He had less than $400 in his bank account and an expired library card. The last text he ever sent was to a number listed as Sandra, simply saying, "Doing okay. Night shift still weird. Miss ya." That hallway, the one he walked into, was examined repeatedly. Electricians came out to test the lights, thinking maybe there was a flicker or surge. Nothing. The bulbs were fine. No blackouts that night, no camera glitches outside of the hallway distortion. They even replaced the entire camera system the following week, state-of-the-art high-def stuff with motion sensors and redundant backup feeds. But it didn't help, because no one wanted to walk down that hallway anymore. Not after what happened to Lonnie. Not after what Jeff claimed he saw. You see? Jeff was the last person to speak to him. At around 4:43 a.m. There was a brief radio transmission caught on the emergency channel. It was only 9 seconds long, buried under static and distant popping. Like a loose wire. But if you cleaned it up, which one of the IT guys did, you could make out a voice. It said, "There's a second hallway that wasn't here before. Don't follow me." Then it cut off. A second hallway. That phrase stuck with people. There were rumors, of course. One of the janitors claimed she once saw a door near the break room that didn't exist the day before. Said it was only there when the overhead lights flickered. Another guy, a meat truck driver doing a delivery run at 3:30 a.m., said he looked in through the plant side window and saw someone standing at the far end of the north corridor. Thought it was a mannequin until it raised its hand and touched the ceiling without moving its feet. HR shut down all talk of it after the first week. They issued an internal memo that Lonnie was likely the victim of foul play off-site, that the footage had been corrupted, and that all further inquiries were to be directed to legal. But people kept talking anyway, whispering during smoke breaks, staring too long at the hallway that looked completely normal during the day and wrong at night. Not visibly different, just felt wrong. Like if you stepped too far past the vending machine, you wouldn't come back out. 2 months later, a new guy, Miguel Alvarez, took over Lonnie's shift. Young kid, barely 20, fresh out of some warehouse job in Amarillo. He laughed when people told him not to stare too long down the hallway. Thought it was just old-timer crap. But he quit after one night. When asked why, he wouldn't say much. Just muttered something about hearing footsteps behind him, even when he stood still. Then he said something that chilled the bones of the office manager. "He smiled at me," Miguel whispered. "From the dark, I saw him. He looked right at me and smiled." They stopped hiring for that shift after that. Installed motion detectors, automated locks, and updated the security protocol so that no one had to patrol alone. Still, the footage of Lonnie's last moment is stored on a separate drive. locked in a cabinet in the site supervisor's office. Not deleted, not erased. Just locked away. And sometimes late at night, when the new system glitches for just a second, the old monitors switch back on. Only briefly. Just long enough to show the hallway. And if you're unlucky enough to be watching, you might see a figure at the end of it. Just standing there, waiting. They left from the Pine Island launch just before dusk, towing their little aluminum flat bottom behind a battered Silverado that had more rust than paint. Locals in Livingston remembered seeing them stop by the bait barn around 6:45 p.m. He was tall, wiry, mid-30s, maybe a former athlete turned mechanic from the look of his shoulders. She was short, round-faced, and laughing at a joke he whispered near the freezer where the minnows wriggled in plastic bags. The clerk remembered it because they were too cheerful. Too picture-perfect for a Thursday night in Polk County. Her name was Kayla Dobson. His was Travis Cole. They lived out near Big Sandy Creek in a white trailer set too close to the woods. People knew them. She worked nights at the hospital in Woodville. He did part-time work fixing up outboards and delivering auto parts for Napa. They weren't strangers to the lake. In fact, they were known to fish late and often, especially when the moon was big and bright, and the stripers got hungry in the coves. That night, the moon was near full. Not harvest bright, but enough to cast faint silver trails across the still water. There was no wind. The water was glass. A perfect night to cast into the shallows near Beffy Creek, where the current whispers more than it speaks, and the submerged. Trees catch your lures like they don't want you leaving. Their boat was found the next morning by a man named Albert Mays, who was jogging with his retriever along the rocky shore near Wolf Creek Park. He noticed it sitting oddly close to land, nose up against the stones like it had been gently nudged there. No damage, no sign of a struggle. The trolling motor was still tilted up, anchors dry. Life jackets draped neatly over the middle seat, but no one was in it. Albert didn't think much at first. People sometimes went swimming off the back and pulled up later. But when he called out and the only reply was the chitter of cicadas, he stepped closer. That's when he saw both their phones tucked into the cup holders. Both wallets zipped into the dry bag under the front seat. Tackle boxes. Latched. Cooler untouched. A few unopened beers clinking inside, and the camera. It wasn't a fancy camera. Just a GoPro mounted between the seats, like a lot of couples used to record their outings. Probably had hours of them laughing, casting, sipping beer, maybe a low-lit kiss or two. Albert turned it over and saw the little red light still blinking. It had power. It had something on it. He handed it to the sheriff when they arrived an hour later. Sheriff Lenny Griggs had worked the county for 19 years. He'd seen drownings, accidents, more meth-related stupidity than anyone ought to. But there was something about the neatness of that boat that struck him as wrong. Not eerie yet, not then but wrong. No sign of a panic. No shoes left behind in the rush to dive in. No dropped hat or spilled bait. Just a boat that came home without its people. The dive team went out. That afternoon, they combed the lake with sonar, divers and dogs, checking from the cove to the bridge. Nothing. Not even bubbles. The water was unusually clear, thanks to the dry spell, and the visibility went down a good 15 feet in places. Still, nothing. The GoPro footage was pulled that evening. The footage started as you'd expect, Travis setting up the camera around 8 p.m. He joked about how many fish he was going to catch, and Kayla teased him about being scared of catfish tails. Around 9:30, they were still in good spirits, passing beers back and forth, occasionally whispering about how quiet it had gotten. Around midnight, Kayla mentioned something odd. She said she kept seeing a light near the tree line. A white flicker, like a lantern. Travis panned the camera toward shore, but there was nothing. A joke passed between them about ghost campers. They laughed it off. At 1:12 a.m., they heard something hit the water. A heavy splash, off to the port side. They both stopped talking. Travis picked up a flashlight and scanned the water, but saw nothing. "Maybe a gator," he muttered, "or a deer slipped in." At 1:46, Kayla asked if he heard breathing. The camera picked it up too. Low, labored, wet, like someone exhaling underwater. But when the camera turned toward the sound, the lake was still. Mirror-perfect. At 2:19, the GPS recorded a slow drift. They weren't paddling, weren't trolling. Yet the boat moved. At 2:47, Kayla gasped and dropped her rod. The camera didn't catch what she saw, only her reaction. Eyes wide, lips trembling. Her voice, "There's someone standing in the trees." Travis didn't answer. He was already pointing the light that way, but again, the camera saw only darkness. Then came 3:02. The final image on the GoPro was a photo, not a video frame. It was a still, automatically triggered, maybe by Kayla, maybe by Travis. It showed both of them sitting quietly in the boat. Kayla's face looked dazed, pale in the moonlight. Travis looked like he was sweating, staring directly at the camera. And between them, where no one had been sitting all night, was a figure. It was wrong in every sense. No clear face, no clothing you could name. Just the vague outline of someone impossibly tall, impossibly thin, and leaning slightly forward as if caught mid-whisper. Its arms trailed past its knees, fingers too long to belong to anything human. Its eyes, or what might have been, were empty shadows. The boat was retrieved and the camera sent for digital enhancement, but no one could say how the figure got there. No video showed it approaching. No ripples disturbed the water. No weight shifted the boat. It simply was there. For that single still image. The sheriff tried to keep the photo under wraps, but people talk. It ended up on Reddit. Got debunked. Then re-debunked. Some said it was AI generated. Others claimed it was a glitch. But those who knew the lake, who had fished its deeper waters, knew better. They remembered the tailies. Stories of the drowned who didn't stay down. Of the thing in the shallows near Kickapoo Creek that sometimes rose on foggy nights and whispered to night anglers. They say Kayla's mother still leaves her voicemail every Friday, still tells her about the weather, still prays over the line. Travis's brother won't touch the lake anymore, moved out to San Marcos. Refuses to talk about the photo. Said once in a drunken rant that he saw someone just like that in a childhood nightmare years before the lake even existed. The boat was sold at auction 6 months later. A young couple from Houston bought it cheap and took it down to the coast. They fished once near Palacios, then left it behind. Wouldn't say why. Just said it never felt empty, not even when they were alone. Lake Livingston remains popular. Locals still fish there, but none of them go out past 2 a.m. anymore. Not since. That photo. Not since that thing between them smiled. She wasn't the type to stir trouble. That's what the manager said, at least. Quiet girl, polite, always clocked out on time, always asked if anyone needed help before she left. Her name was Marissa Templeton, 23, short brown-haired, with these big gray eyes that always looked a little tired but never unhappy. She'd worked at the Cut Price Foods on Franklin Avenue in Waco for almost 2 years, stocked shelves mostly, ran the register if they were short-staffed, and always covered the freezer section on Sunday nights. That was her routine. That's what made it so strange when she didn't come home. Her mother, Irene, said the call came in at exactly 9:57 p.m. That was a little later than usual, but not alarming. Marissa had said, "I'm off now, Mom. I'll be home in 15." Her voice sounded normal. A little distracted maybe, like she was still walking, maybe pushing her cart with returned items toward the back. Irene said she even heard the rolling of a wheel, something rattling on a shelf, and a door shutting in the background. Then a pause. Marissa started to say something else, but her voice cut off mid-word. Not like a call that drops, just a sudden stop. Then the line went. Dead. They found the cart a few minutes after 10, tucked next to the big glass freezer doors on aisle 9. Inside it were 3 pints of Blue Bell, a box of frozen burritos, and her phone screen still lit, unlocked, as if she just set it down. The last open app was her messaging screen. The message she'd been typing said, "Do you ever feel like someone's?" And nothing after that. The cameras didn't help much. Weren't working that night. Store had been having issues with the motion sensor DVR system. The only camera that recorded anything was the one above the registers. That footage caught Marissa walking past lane 3 with the cart, waving to the night cashier, a guy named Robbie. She's smiling. Normal, casual. And then the lights flicker, just for a second, like a brownout, and when they come back on, she's gone. Not just out of frame, gone. The cart still rolling slowly behind where she was standing, then comes to a stop beside the freezer case. She's not there. Didn't run, didn't duck, just gone. Robbie looks up, confused. The tape shows him calling her name, walking down the aisle, looking left and right like maybe she'd slipped off to another section, but the footage doesn't show anyone else. No one. Just the soft hum of the store lights and that old wheeled cart standing perfectly still. Robbie called the manager. They did a sweep of the store. Every aisle, every back room. They even checked the rooftop access. Nothing. Marissa Templeton never walked out the front door. Never made it to the parking lot. Her car keys were in her apron pocket, which was still folded in the locker room. Her purse was in the break room. Untouched. Police came next, and then the theories followed. Maybe she had a breakdown. Maybe she slipped out somehow and wandered off. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe Robbie was involved. Maybe she was kidnapped and the cameras were tampered with, but none of it added up. For one, the building was locked tight. No rear exits without setting off alarms. No broken windows. No tripped sensors. The freezer aisle has a mirror at the far end for line-of-sight security. The footage shows the reflection to same story. One flicker of light and she vanishes. Her mother called every news station in Texas, ran flyers, held candlelight vigils in the parking lot. Some folks came just to see the spot where the cart had stopped, almost like it became a shrine. Flowers wilted there. People left candles, photos, even drawings of Marissa, like she was some kind of martyr for small-town fear. And for a while, things quieted down. The store stayed open. The manager rotated the staff. That freezer aisle was restocked by others. But nobody liked doing it. Not even the newer hires, because weird things started happening after that. It started with the lights. They'd flicker. Same spot, same hour, right around 10 p.m., like a clocked ritual. Just a blink, like someone breathing over a flame, then everything normal again. Except once or twice, the motion sensors in the freezer aisle triggered when no one was there. Footsteps echoed across the waxed linoleum. Boxes fell off shelves without explanation. One night, a janitor swore he saw a figure standing near the freezer door, a short woman, brown hair, face pale as frost. But when he turned the corner, there was no one. He quit that night. Didn't even collect his last check. Robbie stopped showing up for shifts. Said he couldn't sleep. Said he kept dreaming about Marissa, but not like before. Said she was trying to speak to him through static. That she looked wet, like she'd been dipped in ice water, and her eyes weren't blinking. Just wide and glassy. Like a doll's. She'd mouth words in the dream, and sometimes he'd wake up with frost on his bedroom window, even in July. He left town 3 months later. His apartment was left in perfect condition, except for the mirror in the bathroom, which was shattered inward, and a line of melted ice trailing from the shower drain to the bedroom door. They tried bringing in tech crews, replaced the lighting, rewired the camera system, updated the motion detectors, but nothing changed. Aisle 9 still triggered movement at night. One poor kid said he was stocking burritos when the glass doors started fogging from the inside. He wiped them clean and saw handprints, small, pale handprints, as if someone was pressing from the other side. They were on the inside glass, but the freezer was sealed, untouched, and dry. They say if you stand in that aisle late enough, around closing, when the store's gone quiet and the radios stop playing their pop songs, you can hear a voice soft and panicked whispering your name, even if you've never said it aloud. The sound doesn't come from around you. It comes from inside the freezer, not behind the door, inside, like the cold is trying to breathe words. One woman, a floor manager, opened the freezer to check inventory and collapsed, screaming. Sighed. Something brushed her wrist ice cold and slender, like fingers slipping past her skin. She wouldn't go near that aisle again. No one uses Marissa's old locker now. Her name's still on it. Someone tried removing the label once. The adhesive ripped, but underneath, the same name was written again, as if it bled through the metal. After that, they stopped trying. The cut price still operates, but fewer people shop there now. Locals say the lights are never quite right, too dim or maybe too blue. Like the air's heavy with something that doesn't belong. Like the building itself remembers her. And every now and then, when someone checks out with a frozen dinner or a pint of Bluebell, the scanner won't beep, won't read, won't register, like the barcode's gone. The staff has to enter the item manually, and sometimes the total shows $0. A receipt prints anyway. They keep it behind the register now, that first receipt. From the night Marissa vanished, aisle 9. 3 frozen items. One line of text at the bottom that nobody entered manually. It just printed itself. Do you ever feel like someone's... That's all. The manager keeps it locked in a drawer. Says it's probably just a glitch, but he never works nights anymore. And if you ask him why, he'll just shake his head, rub the back of his neck, and mutter something about a cold draft that never goes away. Even in summer, they say the freezer aisle is still 1 degree colder than the rest of the store, no matter what setting they change, and Marissa Templeton's face still shows up on the break room monitor. For a second, flickers in, right before closing. Just gray eyes staring straight into the lens, still tired, still waiting. It was the graveyard shift out of El Paso, hauling a load of paper goods bound for Odessa. Routine haul, nothing fancy. Ricky Bell had driven the route enough times to know every turn, every tumbleweed, and every radio station that faded into. Static around mile marker 182. He was a man who liked patterns, who kept things clean. Even his logbook entries were tidy little rows of military precise numbers. 49 years old, no wife, no kids, and a habit of talking out loud to his rig like it was a dog riding shotgun. The only real company he had was a Bluetooth headset and a dispatcher named Mason, who talked him through the lonely parts of the road like a late-night DJ. That night was cold, even for February. The kind of desert chill that crawls up through the solace of your boots and whispers behind your ears. Ricky had left the pilot truck stop just after midnight, tank full and thermos steaming. He passed the Border Patrol checkpoint near Sierra Blanca without incident and was approaching Van Horn when his voice came over the line, grainy but clear. "Hey Mason, I got a guy up ahead waving me down." You see any alerts on the board? Accidents? Mason checked the system. Negative, Rick. Clean all the way to Odessa. Ricky replied, voice low. Ain't no vehicle near him. Just standing there on the shoulder like he wants to talk. Looks cold as hell. Mason was already typing up a note, probably a drifter. Don't stop, man. You know policy. Ricky didn't answer right away. Then came a click, a little shift in the engine's tone through the headset mic. The kind of subtle noise that dispatchers like Mason learn to recognize. Downshifting, slowing down. Ricky, Mason said. Do. Not engage. Keep rolling. But there was nothing after that. No 10-4, no snort of laughter, no usual drawn-out, yup, Ricky always said before ending a transmission. Just silence, and the line didn't go dead. That was the part Mason couldn't wrap his head around later. The call remained active 17 minutes of faint background noise. At first, it was just idle engine rumble, maybe the squeak of a worn seat spring. Then a strange shuffle. Metallic. Clanks. A low sound that might have been the wind, but had an almost wet edge to it, like the wind was dragging something across the asphalt. Something soft and unwilling. The rig was found by a state trooper, who stopped when he noticed the hazards blinking beside a cattle gate off a ranch road, just west of Van Horn. Trailer door was swinging wide like it had been unlatched mid-drive. Not a box missing, not a scuff on the cargo. The cab door was ajar, the interior light still on, illuminating Ricky's thermos toppled onto the passenger seat and soaking into a manila folder of invoices. Engine running, gear in neutral. See beyond, no sign of struggle. No blood dot, just no Ricky. The ranch road he'd turned onto wasn't on any commercial GPS routing system. It dead-ended 3 miles into nothing, an old cattle path, then just mesquite brush and rocky outcrops that even coyotes avoided. The only footprint was Ricky's, and even that only for about 20 paces before the boot impressions turned odd. Like he'd started dragging one leg, then both, then nothing. The dirt undisturbed after that, like he'd been lifted clean. Out of the world. People talked. Of course, truckers traded versions at every stop along I-10. Some said he'd stopped for a ghost. Others whispered about the area being cursed, that the land around Van Horn had always been ... wrong. The locals said that Ranch Road used to lead to a mine, sealed up after 3 men died in a collapse during the Depression. Every so often, folks said, you could hear voices whispering in Spanish just past the mesquite, calling for help, or maybe warning you off. Mason couldn't shake the last few seconds of that 17-minute audio. He played it more times than he'd admit to the higher-ups. Cleaned it up, ran it through filters. On the 14th minute, there was a voice. Not Ricky's, not a man's. A low, crooning sound. Like someone humming a lullaby, but all out of tune, flat and nasal, like it was being sung through a mouthful of dirt. Then, a whisper. Not in English. Not anything Mason could identify. He sent the clip to a university linguist once anonymously. The reply came back 3 weeks later. The closest match was a dialect spoken by a tribe long extinct, wiped out before. The land was even part of Mexico. The reply ended with a line Mason could never forget. Whoever spoke this wasn't welcoming you. They were binding something, warning something not to come out. Ricky's rig was towed, sanitized, and reassigned to a new driver 6 weeks later. A rookie, kid barely out of training. He lasted one trip, pulled into a rest stop in tears at 3 a.m, said he kept hearing breathing behind the seat, swore the rearview mirror kept fogging like someone else was in the cab. Quit before sunup. The rig's back in the yard now. No one wants it. Dispatch just marks it down as unavailable pending service. Mason still has the headset. Sometimes on quiet nights, he swears it powers on by itself. just a flicker of red light. And once, he could have sworn he heard Ricky's voice. Real soft, like from far away. Think I took a wrong turn, Maze. Then static dot, then humming. It was the third time that month the Bryan PD dispatch received a 911 call from the old Rayburn house on Boone Street, and by now the officers who pulled that duty did so with the same mix of irritation and unease reserved for nuisance reports. That didn't make sense. No power, no phone line, no squatters ever found. The last 2 visits had turned up nothing but shadows, dust, and raccoons bold enough to make eye contact. But something about the way the call came through clear as a bell, a girl's voice whispering, "Help me," left a chill that clung to the skin like heat after a fever breaks. So when Officer Rachel Timmons and her partner, Henry Boone, pulled up in their cruiser just after midnight, she left the engine running. The house stood like a scab that wouldn't heal. 2 stories of warped wood and boarded windows, the paint long since peeled away in jagged flakes. The grass had grown wild around the property, overtaking the crumbling walkway like moss over a forgotten tomb. The front door hung askew, like a mouth forced into an unnatural smile. Rachel stepped out first, the gravel crunching under her boots louder than it should have been in the still night. "You want to go through the front again?" Henry asked, already reaching for his flashlight. "No," she muttered. "Let's try the back this time. Maybe the kids are smarter than we think." Except it wasn't kids. It never felt like kids. They walked past the porch where a wind chime, made from tarnished spoons and rusted bolts, swayed in the breathless air. The rear of the house, the door was shut tight, a padlock dangling from a hasp that hadn't been touched in years. Rachel rattled it anyway. It didn't budge. Henry aimed his flashlight through the small glass pane beside the door, sweeping over the kitchen within. The beam caught broken dishes, a linoleum floor warped by time and water damage, and a set of muddy footprints leading toward the interior hallway. "No way someone's been in there recently," Henry said. "Not with that lock still sealed." Rachel just nodded, lips pressed tight, and walked back around to the front. The door groaned as it opened, hinges crying like something dying slowly. Her flashlight cut through layers of dust and cobwebs. The air inside so heavy with mildew and something more acidic like copper or rot that she gagged. "Same layout," Henry said, his voice low. "Hallway, staircase, 2 rooms to the left, 1 on the right, then the kitchen at the back." But it didn't feel the same. The walls seemed closer, and the dark deeper than it should have been, even with their flashlights sweeping side to side. There was no breeze, no sound from outside, just the soft creak of floorboards beneath their steps. They reached the living room, and Rachel's light fell on a shape near the far wall. A pile of junk, maybe a bundle of old linens or clothes. But as she stepped closer, she saw it wasn't junk at all. It was a rotary phone, not plugged into anything. The cord hung limp like a severed tail. She knelt down, running her fingers along the dial, which was coated in a fine layer of grime. And then she noticed it. The receiver was warm. She stood quickly and turned toward Henry, but he was staring at something on the opposite wall. "Rachel," he said, barely above a whisper. "Come here." She joined him, and they both stared at the wall where something had been carved deep into the wood beneath layers of wallpaper long torn away. It wasn't just a name. It was a full name, etched with such force that splinters curled out around each letter like they'd been clawed into the paneling. Amy Riggs. Underneath it, in the same rough scrawl, "Bring her back." Rachel's mouth went dry. Amy Riggs. That name, she went missing in '98, didn't she? "Yeah," Henry said. "Walked out of a skating rink on South Texas Avenue and vanished. She would have been 14. They never found her." Only thing they did find was her backpack in a creek 2 weeks later. Rachel felt her hand drift unconsciously to her holster. It was too quiet now. The air didn't just feel wrong, it felt watched. She turned toward the stairs and hesitated. Something creaked above them. Not the building shifting, not some squirrel in the attic. This was a step, a full footfall. And then another, upstairs, she said. We clear it and get out. Henry nodded, and they climbed slowly, 1 foot at a time, flashlight sweeping each step. At the top of the stairs was a narrow hallway lined with 3 doors, all shut. The floor up here was colder. Rachel could see her breath now. The first door opened into a bedroom, empty except for a toppled dresser and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. But there was a smell faint, sugary, like decomposing fruit. The second room had no floorboards left, just rotted beams and a drop to the ruined living room below. Rachel held her breath and moved to the last door. She opened it slowly. The flashlight beam jittered as her hand trembled. Inside was a child's bedroom. The wallpaper was faded pink, curling at the corners. A stuffed bear with one missing eye lay face down beside a rotting mattress. And drawn in the dust across the window, perfectly traced by a finger, were the words, "I'm not alone." Rachel stepped into the room. As she did, her flashlight flickered. Then the batteries died. Henry's light vanished too. The room plunged into blackness. And then came the voice. Soft, fragile, not from any direction, just around them. "Where is my mom?" Rachel froze. Her hand moved for her radio, but it gave only static. "I was cold," the voice whispered. "So cold for so long." Then, something moved beside her, a brush of cold air like someone had walked past. Did she forget me?
Rachel turned sharply. "Amy," she said, "is that you?"
Another whisper. "He locked me in the crawl space." I screamed for weeks. The walls ... They stopped listening. Henry fumbled with his light, finally getting it to flicker back on. The beam caught something on the wall. Fresh blood. It had begun to leak from the carving downstairs, now repeating here in jagged, trembling lines. Amy Riggs. The paint beneath bubbled and split as if the wall itself was hemorrhaging. And then, behind them, the closet door creaked open. Rachel turned and raised her light just in time to see something step out. It was small, pale, thin, but the face half of it was bone, the rest warped by age and decay, as though someone had paused the clock halfway through a scream. Amy. She reached for them, not to hurt, but to cling. Her mouth moved, but no words came. Then she vanished, just gone. The flashlight died again, and this time neither officer could make it work. They backed out of the room in the dark, down the hallway, down the stairs, and out into the choking night air where the lights on the cruiser still burned, casting safe halos across the overgrown yard. Neither spoke the whole ride back to the TIA station. The next morning, crime scene and forensics swept the house. They found the etchings. They found the rotary phone. But more than that, they found a sealed crawl space under the floor of that last bedroom. Inside was a tangle of long bones, matted blonde hair, and a rotted pink skate bag with the initials AR stitched in faded blue. The remains were confirmed to be Amy Riggs. The phone calls stopped after that. But sometimes, when Rachel tried to sleep, she swore she heard a dial tone in her dreams, followed by a girl's voice on the line. Where did everybody go? It started like most of the weird stories out there do, in the middle of a long shift, with sweat rolling down your back and your boots sunk ankle-deep in caliche. August in Odessa is a bastard. The heat doesn't just beat down on you, it rises up from the oil-pocked earth, wraps around your lungs, and makes you feel like you're working inside a furnace. That week, a crew of 5 were sent out to a well site just west of Loop 338, a few miles off a dirt spur road that didn't show up on most GPS units. It was an older site, one of those legacy rigs left from the 70s boom, shut down for a while, and now being reopened for inspection and pipeline refurb. The company was trying to save money, repurposing old infrastructure instead of laying fresh line. That's how these things go. The guy who went missing name was Cole McCready. 38, out of Amarillo, worked rigs for about 15 years. Big man, quiet, reliable, didn't drink much, didn't talk much either. But he had this weird sense of when something wasn't right. You know the type. The ones who linger a second longer than the rest at a job site, staring at nothing like they're hearing something faint just under the wind. You'd see it in his eyes sometimes. Like a dog catching a scent on the air you can't smell. That. Tuesday, Cole was sent into the pipeline to inspect for cracks and corrosion before they sent a robotic pig through. The line ran about 70 yards underground, barely wide enough to crawl through. It was supposed to be dry, but there had been reports of moisture deep inside condensation, they said. So Cole suited up. Helmet with a headlamp, a radio clipped. To his shoulder strap and a fiber optic line they'd rigged to follow him for light and video. They fed him in at 11:08 p.m. No one really questioned the time. It was just how the shifts lined up, and with the Permian schedules being what they are, no one wants to waste daylight doing inspection work that needs darkness to spot light leaks. And reflections. He crawled in slow. The radio crackled a bit, normal interference. Metal pipes always mess with signal, especially old ones with rust and God knows what else embedded in the walls. For the first 15 minutes, he kept giving. Standard check-ins. Still moving, pipe feels solid. Then, seeing slight moisture, but no pooling. A few clicks later, hearing a whistle. Probably whined from the junction vents. That was the last time his voice sounded calm. At 11:27, there was a pause. Not static, just silence. One of the guys up top, Andy from Hobbs, called out on the Fabjet to Nevada. Radio. Cole, you still with us? It was quiet a beat longer than it should have been. Then a scratch, like someone brushing the mic against rough metal. Then Cole said something strange. Just one word, Kathan. Or something close to that. Not English, not Spanish. Not any language anyone recognized. He said it like he was scared, like it had been forced out of him. Then came the scream. It wasn't just pain. It was something deeper, like terror wrapped in agony. It had this rising pitch, cut short like someone had reached down his throat and stopped it mid-sound. The radio cut out completely after that. No static, no white noise. Just nothing. Andy wanted to pull him out immediately, but the reel holding. The fiber optic cable had jammed. They had about 20 feet of line slack, and when they tried pulling gently, it wouldn't budge. Felt like it was caught on something. They ran the feed, trying to catch a glimpse, but the camera had gone black. Just this low red glow like the light had been smeared or was shining through water. They thought it was a lens issue at first. Only later did they realize it looked more like the light was shining through something organic. A rescue tech was flown in by dawn. They cut into the pipe a few yards behind the last known location, but it was clean. No signs of coal, no damage. No blood, no drag marks, not even a single dropped tool. The radio was gone too, as if he'd never been there. But they heard him. 5 men standing over that radio panel all heard that scream. All heard that unplaceable word. The company called it equipment failure. Said the pipe probably collapsed and buried him under the weight, but there was no damage. Nothing to dig through, nothing to seal off. They sealed the entry point anyway, poured concrete into both ends, hauled out the inspection rig and marked the site closed until further notice. No one argued. Then came the dreams. Andy was the first. Said he woke up gasping, sweat pouring off him, eyes burning like he'd inhaled sour gas. In his dream, he said he saw a man crawling through a narrow tunnel, light flickering behind him. Then the man stopped, looked over his shoulder, and said, "Don't follow the sound." That was all. Just that. And behind him, something massive and possibly large shifted in the dark. Like a creature too big for the pipe it occupied, moving in impossible silence. You know the kind of terror that sinks so deep into your bones, it wakes you up before it even gets bad? That kind. Two other guys quit that week. One started drinking. Again after 8 years sober. The last man, Rawl, went back to Midland and refused to work nights. He wouldn't talk about it, but you could tell something broke inside him. Within a month, the company blacklisted the site from night shifts. Midnight curfew, no exceptions. Any work after dusk had to be signed off by regional managers and done under floodlights, but even that didn't help. Strange noises started getting reported, echoes from the ground, like someone scratching inside the pipe, even though both ends had been sealed solid with reinforced concrete. Even the seismic equipment started picking up irregular pulses, small rhythmic vibrations from somewhere deep under the site. Like a heartbeat or footsteps. Locals whispered about it too. Some said the site had been cursed even before the 70s rigs. That the land there was never supposed to be disturbed. That it was marked by the Comanche centuries ago and known to the early oil wildcatters as a dead stretch. You wouldn't find that written anywhere official, but old-timers remember. There's a feeling you get in some parts of Texas, a hush that falls over the dirt even when the wind's blowing. That's how it was out there. A dead silence under the pump jacks, like the earth was holding its breath. A year after coal vanished, some new hires out of Lubbock were brought in to work a nearby site. One of them got curious, didn't believe the stories, and went poking around that old pipeline entry during a smoke break. He found the edge of the concrete seal still intact, but someone or something had etched into it. Just one word. Not scratched with a tool, but burned in like acid had seared the letters into the hardened slab. It read, Cawthon. No one touched it after that. The whole lot was fenced off. Company trucks stopped driving past it, even on detour. Some claim on cool nights you can still hear faint radio static near the fence. Others say if you put your ear to the ground, you'll hear a man's voice, whispering for help, or maybe warning you. Depends who you ask. But one thing's certain. Nobody goes near that site after dark anymore. And if they do, they don't come back quite the same. If they come back at all. Tyler Foreman was the kind of kid who didn't make a ripple in the world unless you tossed a rock his way. 19, soft-spoken, still carried a little of that awkward high school shuffle in his walk. He liked old trucks, late-night drives, and sour gummy worms, the kind that make your lips pucker until your face aches. He lived with his dad in Belton, worked a part-time job at an auto shop, and kept mostly to himself. Folks who knew him said he had the manners of a Sunday preacher and the eyes of someone who'd seen something he shouldn't have. That Thursday in late June, when the heat turned the asphalt into syrup and the air was too thick to breathe, Tyler took his dad's old Silverado down I-35 toward Temple. Said he needed gas and wanted to grab snacks for their upcoming weekend trip to the lake. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Just a Buc-ee's stop like 1,000 other people that day. Only Tyler didn't come back. The security footage showed him walking into the Buc-ee's just after 3:42 p.m. He wore a white tee, cargo shorts, and flip-flops. In one camera, he's walking past the ice machine, rubbing his neck like it itched. Bad. Another camera caught him near the fountain drinks, his face flushed and shiny. But it was the third camera mounted above the snack wall that captured something no one could explain. Tyler stood still. Just stood there. His eyes were fixed on something just out of frame. His lips moved, but no audio feed existed to catch what he said. He reached out, not to grab a snack, not to touch a shelf, but to something behind the display. His hand hovered, trembling, fingers splayed like he was feeling heat coming from a fire, and then he was gone, not walked away, not out of frame, gone. One frame he's there, the next he's not. Police combed through the footage frame by frame. No one bumped him, no one came near. His reflection in the cooler glass disappeared with him. You could see a faint ripple along the glass door like heat rising from a blacktop, and then nothing. It was as if someone had erased him like a smudge on a photo. The next frame showed an empty aisle. They thought it was a glitch. Maybe the camera skipped a second. Maybe he ducked behind something. They searched the store, every inch. They questioned employees, customers, anyone who might have seen him. But no one remembered him checking out. No one remembered speaking to him. It was as though Tyler never existed past that last moment in front of the snack wall. Then the photos started turning. Up dozens of them. Maybe more. Not security footage phone photos. Random, amateur snapshots taken by customers at Buc-ee's that day. Most were selfies or kids posing in front of the beaver mascot, folks showing off overflowing carts or goofy t-shirts. But in the background of those photos, always the background, there was Tyler, standing in front of the snack wall, same expression every time, blank, dazed, one arm outstretched. Like a mannequin someone forgot to move. The creepier part? None of the people who took those photos remembered seeing him when they were there. Some swore the photos had changed since they last looked. One woman, Karen Delgado, posted a video on Facebook showing her phone's gallery. In the original picture, her daughter posed with 2 bags of jerky in front of the wall. Clear shot, no one behind her. But when she scrolled through it again, that evening, there was Tyler blurred, out of focus, halfway into the frame like he was photobombing her life. A few people joked about it. Temple time traveler, some called him. Others said it was a prank, a deepfake, a viral stunt. But then a man from Killeen claimed his wife found a picture of Tyler in her phone. Only they hadn't been to Buc-ee's in 2 years. Another woman from Salafo said the photo was from her wedding day, taken at her reception. And there, peeking through the window behind the cake table, was the same figure. Pale, watching. When the police tried to trace Tyler's phone, they got static. A tech from the sheriff's department claimed the GPS kept pinging from different points, first in Temple, then west near Rogers, then down near Holland, all within seconds. He thought the system was glitching until he realized the timestamps overlapped. 3 identical pings from 3 separate spots at once. When they checked traffic cams, nothing showed up. Just that same shimmer in the air, like a heat mirage that never quite cleared. Tyler's dad, Greg Foreman, never gave up. He printed missing posters, hired a private investigator, even reached out to a fringe radio host from Austin who specialized in phenomena. The guy came down with some equipment, set up camp in the Buc-ee's parking lot, and broadcasted live that Saturday night. Said he was trying to tune into the signal. What signal, no one knew. But around 2:17 a.m., the broadcast went dead. No noise, no static, just silence. When they found him the next morning, the equipment was still running. But the man himself was missing. Only thing they found was his boots sitting neatly beside the snack wall. Security cameras didn't catch a thing. No entry, no exit. No ripple. A week after that, Greg Foreman disappeared too. He'd been parked outside the Buc-ee's most days, sleeping in his truck, handing out flyers. That morning, another customer said they saw him standing just inside the entrance, looking confused, like he didn't remember why he was there. When they walked out 15 minutes later, he was gone. No trace. The truck remained, keys still in the ignition, engine cold. Flyers scattered across the front seat like someone had been rifling through them. The store manager tried to ban all talk of it. Said the rumors were hurting business. But the story wouldn't die. New photos showed up. A family from Lubbock took a picture in front of the iced tea station. Tyler again, standing just to the left. A man from Round Rock found a shot in his cloud storage. He didn't remember taking Tyler crouching in a corner near the restroom signs, mouth slightly open like he was trying to scream. By the end of July, the store brought in a new team to replace all the security cameras. They shut down the snack wall for remodeling, put up fresh tile, new shelving, brighter lighting. They even hired a blessing from a local church to cleanse the place. But still, every now and then, someone would pause mid-aisle, their eyes drawn to a shimmer near the chip display, a place where the air never felt quite right. One night, a cashier named Ava said she saw someone watching her from that aisle after closing. She thought it was a late straggler, told him they were shut. But when she turned the corner, the aisle was empty. She checked the cameras later. All 12. Feeds went black at exactly 2:19 a.m. for 1 minute and 47 seconds. When they came back on, nothing had changed. Except for one thing. On the floor in front of the snack wall lay a single, unopened bag of sour gummy worms, still fresh, still cold. Tyler's favorite. No one touched it. They left it there until morning. When the manager came in and tried to throw it out, the bag had vanished too. They say if you walk into that Bookies just after 2 in the morning and head toward the snacks, you might feel a little colder near that back wall. You might feel watched. If you stay too long, if you look into the glass freezer doors and see something moving that shouldn't be, turn around. Leave. Because sometimes, even now, phones still ping with pictures that don't make sense. Ones no one remembers taking. Ones where he's still standing there, hand outstretched, like he never left, like he's still trying to come back. The field behind the farmhouse had always been a little too quiet for Martha's liking. It rolled out in gentle waves past the back fence, then dipped into a low swell where the grass grew taller and the bluebonnets took over. Spring brought them thick and wild every year, carpeting the hillocks like blue velvet, and the neighbors said it was the prettiest spot in all of Gonzales County. But pretty things sometimes cover up quiet things. And quiet things, if left alone long enough, begin to whisper. That Sunday had started warm, filled with birdsong and the low rumble of distant tractors. A barbecue had been the plan, just a few close family members and their kids. They had a little swing set out back, and the boys had started, playing tag between the rusting swing poles and the fence that lined the flower field. One of them, Caleb, had just turned 6. A wiry kid with a deep laugh and a mop of light brown curls that always seemed damp with sweat, no matter how early in the day. His mother, Dana, had said he was faster than he looked, could dart like a lizard between your fingers. Martha had been refilling sweet tea. Inside, when she heard the shouting, the kind of giggling scream that comes when kids are just on the edge of too much fun, she stepped out with a tray of glasses and caught sight of Caleb sprinting toward the fence. The boy's cousin Eli was behind him, puffing and red-faced, calling out that Caleb cheated. The adults were lounging near the grill, half listening, half drunk on sunlight and mesquite smoke. Then there was that moment, the one where everything just pauses. Eli had stopped at the fence, leaning over it with his palms pressed to the wood, squinting. The bluebonnets were thick and tall past that point, rustling like water. Caleb had disappeared into them. Just like that. 1 second there, the next. Gone. Martha called out, "He's in the flowers," and walked closer, assuming he was crouching down, hiding, maybe waiting to jump out and scare his cousin, but the flowers kept swaying. Not in one spot, not where a boy might be crawling, but in this slow, rhythmic ripple as if a soft wind moved across them from nowhere. And then they heard it, a laugh. It was Caleb's laugh, clear and high and echoing across the field, but it didn't come from a single direction. It seemed to travel, flitting from one part of the bluebonnets to another, never settling, always just a second behind where you turned your head. The search began simple. Calling, walking the rows, trying to keep the other kids calm. By sunset, it had spiraled into full panic. Flashlights were brought out. Dogs. They combed the field all the way to the creek line, and when the sheriff showed up with more help, they all took turns repeating the same thing. The boy had run just past the fence into the bluebonnets and then vanished. No rustling, no scream, no sign of a fall or animal or anything. What stuck in Martha's mind? What lodged there like? A sliver of glass was that the flowers had kept moving long after they should have gone still. Even as the searchers stomped around and flattened them, that same strange ripple would start again, curling around boots and disappearing toward the back end of the property. Like something dragging its fingers through the petals. They found nothing. That night, no shoes, no shirt, no trail. Only his small handprint, faint and perfect, on the wood of the fence about 4 feet up, where he braced himself to hop over. Dana never really came back from that night. She sat on the porch for hours after everyone else had gone home, just staring into the field. Sometimes she whispered his name like she was trying to summon it from her own mouth. As if by saying Caleb enough, the wind might answer. A week passed, then another. The story made the local paper, but not much further. The sheriff concluded it was a possible animal attack. Maybe a wildcat or a coyote had taken him. Though none of the dogs had picked up a trail, the family held a tamale, memorial without a body. Dana refused to attend. Then came the recordings. Eli had been holding an old camcorder that afternoon, the kind with grainy video and a tinny microphone, and he'd been filming Caleb from behind as they ran. Dana found it when cleaning. His room, stuffed in a shoebox with some race car toys. The video started normal enough, Caleb laughing, darting toward the fence. Then the camera wobbled and dipped as Eli tried to climb over, and the lens caught just a few seconds of footage before it dropped entirely into the grass. Those few seconds, Caleb was running, but not like a boy having fun. He was sprinting flat out, his head turning back over his shoulder. His mouth was open, mid-scream, but there was no sound on the tape. No sound at all. Just silence. In the last frame before it cut out, something stood in the flowers ahead of him. Not a person. Not really. A tall, warped silhouette. Thin. Pale. Almost see-through. Like heat rising from the road. It had arms, too many, and they were curled at odd angles, tipped with something darker than fingers. The family didn't tell the sheriff. They didn't tell anyone. But after that, Dana stopped talking completely. That summer, strange things started happening to the land. The grass on the other side of the fence stopped growing, even with rain. The soil turned hard, almost crusted with white film. Birds wouldn't fly over it. The family dog, an old retriever, refused to go near the fence line and would whine at the door if let out after dusk. And still, that laugh. Once or twice a week, always at night, always after midnight. Martha heard it from her window first, soft and distant, like it was being carried in from a mile away. But each time it came again, it seemed closer, sharper. Sometimes it changed. Got warped, like a cassette left too long in the sun, turning into something that started as a child's laugh, but ended like an echo from a hollow throat. By August, Dana had vanished too. Martha found her car parked in the back pasture, Driver's door open, engine still warm. Footprints led up to the fence. One set, bare feet. They crossed the dirt, dipped into the bluebonnets, and just stopped. Nothing grew on that land anymore. The flowers still came, sure. A thick bloom every spring, always bluebonnets, always heavier on that same patch. But everything else, grass, weeds, wildflowers, died at the root. The wind there smells strange now, like copper and wilted cotton. The fence remains, but the boards are cracked, scorched in places, though no one ever remembers fire. And sometimes in the early morning, before the dew lifts, a shape can be seen in the mist. Small, boy-sized, crouched low in the field. It always fades when the sun rises, but before it does, it watches the house. Martha never left the property, not even after everyone else did. She keeps the porch light on all night. Keeps a bell by the back door. She says if you really listen, if you sit in the silence just after the wind dies, you can hear him calling not for help, but for someone to come play. They found the purse on a Tuesday morning, just after a night of heavy Gulf rain had turned the roadside ditches outside Beaumont into shallow rivers of brown muck and pine needles. A county maintenance crew out early to clear a downed limb. Off Highway 124, spotted the leather strap first looped over a sodden mound of grass like someone had tried to fish it out before giving up. The rest of the purse was buried in slick, dark mud. Water had seeped into every seam. It looked like it had been there longer than the storm, maybe days, maybe weeks. No wallet, no keys, just a few wet receipts, a half-used lipstick, and the phone. The phone wasn't anything special, just an old iPhone with a cracked case and a muddy smear across the back. It buzzed as soon as Deputy Coleman touched it. He jerked his hand back, like it had stung him, but it kept buzzing anyway. Buzz, buzz. Then the screen lit up, and he saw the name glowing on the lock screen in pale green letters. Kelly Marie Dutton. At first, he thought it was a missed call. But it wasn't. It was ringing, and the caller ID said Kelly Marie Dutton. Coleman looked around, thinking maybe someone nearby had the same name. Maybe someone was trying to prank him. But the road was empty except for the county truck and his cruiser, both steaming faintly in the morning sun. He answered the call. All he heard was breathing. Wet, slow, like someone lying down with fluid in their lungs. Then a voice, low, cracked, and oddly childlike, muttered something he couldn't catch. He asked again, "Hello? Hello? Who is this?" But the line went dead. He held on to the phone for a second, looking down at the name again. Kelly Marie Dutton. It rang a bell. It should have, because just 8 days earlier, he'd helped cover the scene where Kelly's car was found. Upside down in the Sabine River, driver's side window shattered. Her seatbelt still buckled, blood on the inside roof, but no body. Divers had searched all day and into the next morning, dragging with hooks and sonar, coming up with nothing but river silt and beer cans. Coleman brought the phone into the station, placed it in an evidence bag, and told the chief. They called the number back, no answer. They checked with the phone company. Service was inactive, they said. Disconnected the day after the wreck. But the call log showed 6 calls made that morning, all from the same number, all to local numbers, and 1 to 911. That one had never gone through. It was cut off in the first second, never patched to dispatch. But the audio file still existed. They played it on the office speaker. Static. Something like water rushing. Then a woman's voice whispering, "I see you. You don't have to follow me anymore," the chief said to let it go. Probably a glitch. Maybe someone faked the phone. Log? Maybe it wasn't even her purse. People dump stuff all the time, and weird things happen when electronics get wet. But Coleman couldn't let it go. because he knew Kelly, not well, but enough. They went to high school together. She was quiet, church girl, waitressed for a while out at that little diner near Nome before getting married and moving out toward Sour Lake. Her husband, Troy Dutton, was a roughneck. Worked rigs all over East Texas. They'd split up 2 months before the crash. Number: kids. A handful of calls about domestic disturbances, but nothing violent. Nothing you could charge on. Coleman drove out to Troy's place that afternoon. Trailer on stilts at the edge of a big mosquito-choked lot lined with rusting cars and wind chimes made from beer cans. Troy didn't look surprised when he answered the door. He looked tired, hollow, like he hadn't slept in a long time. Coleman noticed the gun tucked behind the doorframe, half concealed by a dirty towel. Didn't say anything about it. Just asked if Troy knew anything about the purse or the phone. Troy laughed, dry and bitter, said no. Said he hadn't seen Kelly since the week before she went off the bridge. Said he thought maybe she'd killed herself. She was hearing things? He mumbled. Said someone was watching her through the phone. Said she could hear herself breathing on it even when she wasn't holding it. You ever hear something like that? Coleman didn't answer. That night, the phone rang again. This time it was in the evidence locker, no charger. Battery should have been dead, but it rang once. And then again. Dispatch didn't know what to do, so they called Coleman. He came in and listened. This time it was clearer. No static. Just a voice saying, "The lights under the water." Over and over. "The lights under the water. You can see me if you look." The next morning, Coleman drove back out to the river. He parked where the wreck had happened. The guardrail was still bent from where the car had torn through it. A little pink ribbon still fluttered on one post. He stood on the edge and looked down. Muddy water, calm now. No ripples. He climbed down the embankment, walked along the shoreline. The smell of wet earth and rotting plants hung thick in the air. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, only that he'd know it when he saw it. And after 20 minutes, he did. A set of footprints, bare, small, leading from the water to the trees. They were fresh, no rain since yesterday. But the ground was too soft to hold shape for long. They ended after maybe 30 feet. No sign of turning back. That night, Coleman took the phone home. He shouldn't have. But something told him it wouldn't stop until he did. He charged it, turned it on. It lit up like new. No password. No lock screen. Just the home screen. 4 missed calls, all from me. He opened the photo album. The most recent picture wasn't taken by her. It was a selfie. The kind the camera takes when someone's trying to use Face ID and it fails, except this one had no face. Just a dark room, blurred movement, and 2 eyes glowing faintly in the corner. Human eyes. But too wide. Too bright. The last message said, "It's still in me." He tried deleting the photo. The phone turned off. When it turned back on, the picture was back. And a new one had joined it. Same room. But now the figure was closer. Just outside the frame. A hand. A shoulder. Something stretched unnaturally long. Coleman dropped the phone. It vibrated once. A new notification. Live call. Kelly Murray DUT&T didn't answer. Couldn't, but the call connected anyway. He heard. Breathing. Long. Labored. Followed by a voice his own whispering, "Help me get it out." The phone burned in his hand until he threw it across the room. It cracked against the wall. The screen split in a spiderweb pattern. But it didn't stop glowing. The next morning, he called in sick. The day after, he didn't answer his door. By the weekend, no one had seen him. They found his cruiser abandoned outside the Sabine River Bridge. Driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. No signs of struggle. just a trail of barefoot prints leading down to the water. Beside them, half sunken in the mud, was a phone dot. It was ringing. And the name on the screen said Coleman. When they answered, no one spoke, but they could hear something moving slow and wet beneath the surface. They said his name was Dale Rucker, though half the guys who worked the early shift just called him Red on account of his sun-scorched neck and the old, beat-up Astros cap he never took off. He'd been with the Brunham Co-op for over 12 years, mostly doing maintenance on the grain elevator and silo systems along the southern stretch near the old railway spur. He wasn't a man who talked much, maybe a grunt here, a nod there. But he showed up early, never called in sick, and didn't stir up trouble. Folks like that in small Texas towns tend to become part of the background. You notice them only after. They're gone. The morning it happened, the sky hung low and gray like a sheet of dull steel pressed against the horizon. Rain had come down heavy the night before, turning the gravel lot around the silo into a soup of mud and weeds. Dale had punched in at 5:47 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than required, same as always. Security footage showed him walking across the yard with his thermos tucked under one arm and his tool bag slung over his shoulder. He moved like a man with a purpose, not hurried, but not distracted either. He nodded to the foreman, Hank DeWitt, and headed towards silo #4. They were doing routine cleaning that week, blowing out residual dust and checking for rot or bird nesting in the upper chutes. Nothing out of the ordinary. The grain levels had been drained low during the previous haul, so most of the bins stood nearly empty except number 4, which still had about 4 feet of spoiled milo sitting at the bottom like a bed of soggy earth. That one was Dale's responsibility that morning. Around 6:30, Hank radioed him to check on progress. No answer. 15 minutes later, he sent a kid named Travis out to look. The hatch on number 4 was closed, locked from the outside like standard protocol demanded. No sounds, no movement. Travis knocked 3 times, then again. Still nothing. When Hank got there and broke the seal, the hatch opened with a groan that echoed like a church bell in the hollow drum of the silo. The air inside was musty and warm, the kind of sour heat you'd expect from damp grain and trapped moisture. But it was the footprints that froze them both in place. Wet prints, bare, human. They started just past the hatch, no sign of boots or socks, just the narrow outline of pale, dripping feet in the silty dust. The trail wound inward toward the center of the silo, then simply stop. No smudge marks, no backward trail, no body. They found Dale's boots placed neatly beside the hatch, along with his thermos, which was still warm to the touch. His tool bag lay unzipped, untouched. One wrench rested beside it, the kind used for loosening the internal bracing bolts. But none of the bolts had been moved. Authorities were called in. Sheriff Maxwell showed up around 7:45. They brought in a cadaver dog, then a second one just to be sure. Nothing. No signs of a body. No blood. No disturbance in the milo pile below. They drained the bin entirely by 1 p.m. The wet grain slid out in clumps, spreading onto the concrete like dark molasses. They sifted every inch. Nothing. Dale Rucker had disappeared without a trace. The grain silo was sealed off and shuttered for a full week. OSHA came out. So did a federal inspector from Houston. There was talk of maybe faulty scaffolding or hidden internal collapse, but every structural test came back normal. No sinkholes, no trapdoors, nothing hidden beneath the grain. No openings. Just a sealed, cylindrical tower of rusting steel and silence. The town tried to move on. Folks muttered about it over coffee at the Bluebell Diner. Rumors spun fast, maybe. Dale had snapped, run off, faked his death somehow. Some whispered about the footprints and how strange it was they didn't lead out. But in Brenham, things like this just didn't happen. Not to men like Dale. 3 weeks later, something else happened. Travis, the same kid who found the hatch, didn't show up for work. His mom said he'd left early, told her he was going to swing by the co-op to drop off a badge. He'd been having nightmares. Said he couldn't stop hearing something moving inside silo number 4 at night, like scratching or maybe whispering. He even recorded a voice memo on his phone the night before he vanished. It was mostly static, but about 22 seconds in, there's a low sound that almost resembles a man breathing. Just one drawn-out inhale, no exhale. Then the file ends. His truck was found parked near the same hatch. The keys were in the ignition. His boots? Sitting neatly beside the hatch, just like Dale's. After that, silo number 4 was welded shut. Not locked. Not chained. Welded. Steel braces were added across the hatch and upper maintenance panels. Cameras were mounted around the perimeter. The kind that stream directly to a closed circuit. They catch animals, sometimes stray dogs, the occasional raccoon. But every so often, late at night, one of the cameras glitches. Not static. Not digital interference. Just a dark screen with something pressing close to the lens, almost like breath. The security feed always resets within 10 seconds. The sheriff's office has reviewed the footage dozens of times, but nothing's ever come of it. It's written off as condensation, fog, bugs, whatever helps folks sleep at night. Then came the flooding last spring. The storm that rolled in from LaGrange dumped 7 inches of rain in 2 days. Most of the town fared all right, but the drainage ditch around the co-op overflowed. By Sunday morning, the back lot was under 2 feet of water. The silo foundations were submerged. Workers waded in with sandbags. One of them, a woman named Karen Lively, said she heard someone shouting from inside number 4. She thought it was kids playing a prank dot until she walked closer. The shouting wasn't playful. It was low, desperate, like a man stuck under rubble. A man calling for help with a mouth full of dirt. Karen ran, swearing she heard her name spoken in that same raspy, half-drowned voice. It didn't echo like you'd expect inside a silo. It felt directed. Personal. Later that day, the grain inspector arrived to assess the flood damage. When they reviewed the feed from earlier that morning, the cameras had all gone dark for exactly 17 minutes. And when they came back on, the lens on the number 4 cam was fogged on the inside. The casing was sealed, triple layered and pressure tested. It wasn't supposed to fog. And yet it did. They haven't reopened the silo. No one goes near it now. Not after dark. Some say the metal hums at night, like something shifting inside, dragging itself around the empty walls. Others say you can hear voices, calling names that don't belong to anyone alive. The strangest part? Every few months, someone finds wet footprints near the hatch, sometimes small, sometimes large, always bare, always leading in, never out, and every time it happens, someone from the town disappears within a week. Not always a worker, sometimes a drifter, a teenager, a hitchhiker. Their last known location? Somewhere near the co-op. Near silo #4. The hatch is still welded. The cameras still roll. But if you stand out there in the silence just before dawn, you might hear it. That slow inhale. Like something deep below is waking up. Something that doesn't care who you are, just so long as you're barefoot when you come inside. It was one of those long, low, aching stretches of Texas highway where the heat wavers off the blacktop like something alive and the wind moves in tight. Uneasy circles, carrying grit and whispers if you're listening close enough. Mile marker. 186 didn't look like much, just another green metal sign with peeling white letters leaning a few degrees off true, stuck between scrub brush and the remnants of an old barbed wire fence. If you blinked, you'd miss it. Most people did. But some didn't. Some slowed down. Some stopped. That was the problem. It started with a local trucker named Elmer Rudd. He'd been hauling cattle feed from Lubbock to Austin, driving the night stretch to make up for lost time after a blowout near Sweetwater. Somewhere after midnight, near that nowhere stretch between Eden and Mason, he saw a figure standing on the shoulder just before mile marker 186. A skinny man in jeans and a long coat too dark for Texas heat. No bag, no thumb out, just standing. Still, Elmer wasn't the kind to pick up hitchhikers, especially not at night. But something about the man made him slow down. He figured maybe it was a stranded ranch hand or someone whose truck gave out. Maybe the long coat hid something broken underneath. He eased the truck halfway onto the shoulder, tapped the hazards, and leaned across to throw open the passenger door. Only, there was no one there. No scuff of boots in the gravel. No shape retreating into the brush. Just empty dark. Elmer cursed, shut the door, and pulled back onto the road, making a joke to himself about ghosts in the mirror. But 2 hours later, he was found pulled off on the shoulder near Brady, rig still idling, both doors locked from the inside. Elmer was missing. All they found in the cab was his thermos, still warm, and his CB radio keyed open with a burst of static that hadn't stopped. That's how it started. One guy, one story. You could write it off. People vanish. People lose their minds. Truckers go too long without sleep. But it wasn't just Elmer. The second incident came 3 days later. A couple from San Angelo, Brenda and Mike Callahan, were on their way to visit family in Llano. They'd left late after Brenda's shift at the hospital. According to dashcam footage pulled from their SUV, they slowed down near mile marker 186 around 12:46 a.m. You can see Mike lean forward talking, pointing. Brenda puts on the turn signal. They pull over. The footage shows the passenger window roll down. There's nothing visible outside, just the edge of the shoulder and the dark, but Mike says something, leans toward the window like he's listening. Then he opens his door. The screen glitches. And in the next frame, they're gone. The SUV was found the next morning, doors ajar, engine running, headlights still on. No signs of struggle, no tracks. Just an odd smell inside wet earth and old wire, according to the trooper who filed the report. Their phones were still inside, the last photo timestamped at 12:45 a.m., showing the empty road ahead. And something faint in the rear view. A blurred shape, too tall, too still, standing in the road behind them. After that, it started to spread. A podcast picked up the story. Then Reddit got a hold of it. Urban explorers, ghost hunters, armchair investigators, everyone wanted a piece of mile marker 186. A kid named Landon Harper drove out there from College Station with a group of friends and a camcorder. They went live on Instagram, all of them joking and drinking and egging each other on. The last 30 seconds of that video showed Landon stepping out of the car. You can hear one of his buddies shout, "Don't be stupid." Then Landon turns. Toward the ditch, walks 10 feet and stops. Not like he saw something, like something saw him. The video goes dark. They never found him. His friends were later picked up 6 miles down the road, wandering in the median. No shoes, bleeding from their ears. One of them kept repeating the same phrase over and over. He didn't open the door. He didn't open the door. The doctors said they suffered auditory trauma from some kind of high-frequency noise. They still don't speak. Then came the 911 call. It was routed through San Saba County Dispatch, timestamped at 3:11 a.m. on a Tuesday. The voice. On the line was male, young, sounded like it had been dragged over broken glass. He said, "You shouldn't stop for him. He doesn't get in the car. He just watches, and if you open the door..." The rest was drowned in static. The odd thing wasn't the message. It was the source. The call came from a landline registered to a home in a town called Pearsall. Only Pearsall doesn't exist. Not anymore. It was wiped off the map in 1972 when a dam project flooded the valley it sat in. Everyone was relocated. The houses were razed. What's left of the town lies 30 feet underwater near Lake Ivy, and yet the phone line, according to telecom logs, lit up for exactly 4 minutes that night. Then it went dead again. Permanently. That was when DPS sealed off the stretch of road between mile marker 184 and 188. They blamed it on erosion, unstable soil. Locals weren't convinced. The shoulder didn't crumble. The asphalt didn't crack. But troopers stopped responding to calls out there. And the locals learned not to drive that stretch after midnight. Truckers took alternate routes, even if it meant another hour and a half. It became a kind of whispered warning. Don't stop at 186. But you still hear the stories. A patrolman out of Mason, retired now, claimed he saw the hitchhiker once during a foggy run in '98. Said the man looked pale, soaking wet, like he'd crawled out of a well. Said he held up a hand like he wanted a ride. The officer slowed, rolled his window down. That was the last thing he remembered. He woke up the next morning parked behind his own house with dried blood in his nose and the phrase, "He hears through the wire," scratched into his windshield. A waitress from a truck stop near Eden said a man came in once just after 2 a.m., sat at the counter, ordered coffee. She said he didn't talk, didn't blink. But when she went to pour his cup, the lights above the counter burst one by one. When she looked up, he was gone, but the stool was still warm. She quit that night, took a job in Abilene and wouldn't drive east again. There's a rumor now, just a whisper, like a dare, that if you drive past mile marker 186 with your passenger door unlocked, you'll hear a second set of footsteps in your car by the time you hit the next bend. You won't see him, you won't hear his voice, but your radio might fuzz up, your mirror might tilt, and sometimes, if the wind's right, you'll smell wet dirt and wire. No one knows who he was. No missing person matches. No locals claim him. He just started showing up one day. Some think he's a memory that didn't die right. Others say he's a piece of something older, something that slipped out from under the ground after a fault line cracked beneath the hill. One old woman claimed he was a voice left behind when a town drowned and the wires carried his scream too far. But one thing's always the same, he never gets in the car. Not really. He just waits, watches, and if you stop, if you roll down your window, unlock your door, speak a single word to the shape standing in the dark, he marks you. You won't vanish right away. You might even make it all the way home, but sooner or later, you'll hear your phone ring, and when you answer, all you'll hear is a long, sharp breath, followed by your own voice saying, "I didn't open the door." It was almost 3:41 in the morning when Nurse Angela Salinas finished her shift at Mercy West Medical Center in Laredo. The graveyard crew had thinned. The IQ hallways bathed in that dull fluorescent hum that made the linoleum gleam like a wet tongue. She waved to Carla at the front desk, badge still clipped to her scrubs, her pink shoes making that soft, rubbery squeak as she walked down the corridor toward the employee exit. Routine. Mundane. She'd done it 1,000 times. What wasn't? Routine was what showed up on the CCTV footage later. Her husband, Marcos, came in the next morning just before noon, bags under his eyes and his shirt wrinkled like he hadn't slept. She hadn't come home. No call, no messages. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Carla remembered seeing her leave, or at least walking toward the end of the West Hall. But she never badged out, and her car was still parked in the employee lot under the pole light near the south gate. All her stuff, keys, phone, even her wallet was still in her locker. Hospital security reviewed the footage. And that's when things started to fray. The timestamp showed Angela walking down the hallway, adjusting her ponytail, tired smile on her face. She passed room 214, then 216, then approached the vending machine's old beige things that barely worked, humming like they were powered by ghosts. As she passed them, the feed caught a strange motion. A figure too tall stepped out from behind the vending machine. No one could explain how anyone, let alone someone over 6 feet, had been behind there. The machines were pressed tight to the wall. No gap, no shadows. But the figure stepped out like it had been waiting. Not walking, slithering, fluid and silent. Then the footage cut to static. When it resumed, 10 seconds later. The hallway was empty. Angela was never seen again. They searched everywhere. Marcos paced that hospital for 2 days straight, asking nurses, orderlies, janitors, anyone who'd seen something strange. No one had. A few staff joked that maybe she just walked out the back and ran away, maybe she was sick of the night. Shifts, the thankless patients, the sound of ventilators whispering in the dark. But that wasn't Angela. She was grounded, kind. She had student debt like a millstone and a mother with failing kidneys who lived 2 blocks down in a rental. They shared with Angela's sister. She wouldn't just vanish, but she did. And then came the second part. A janitor named Luis G. worked the same hallway 3 nights later. He didn't know about the footage. No one outside security did. But at 2:12 a.m., he refused to go near the vending machines. Said he saw something move. Something wrong. When pressed, he said it was a woman. She looked like a nurse. Pink shoes. Her badge swinging from her scrub collar. But her face didn't move. It was like someone had wrapped her head in cling film, not covered. It just pulled her features too tight, made her eyes too wide, her smile too dry and stuck in place. Luis said she waved at him, said his name. That's what broke him. He bolted out of the hallway, tossed his mop bucket into the elevator, and quit by morning. Security checked the feed again. This time it showed nothing. No Angela. No figure. Just Luis, standing there, frozen for nearly 2 minutes. Then dropping his mop and backing away like a man who saw something crawling toward him on all fours. Word spread quietly through the hospital. A rumor, then a whisper, then a warning. Don't stay too long near the vending machines after 2 a.m. Some said it was a prank. Maybe someone hacked the feed. Maybe Angela had a psychotic break. But then the nurses started noticing small things, personal items going missing. Clipboard pens vanishing, found later half melted in drawers. A coffee mug left near room 214 shattered into pieces without a sound. No one even heard it drop. Then, a patient, Mr. Harold M., a stroke victim, started mumbling words during the night. He never spoke before. Not once since his stroke, but he started saying one phrase over and over, "She's still here." Then something else. She doesn't blink. Angela's mother came in a week after her disappearance. She brought food for the nurses, homemade, tamales and arroz con leche, asking if anyone had seen her daughter. When they said no, she stood near the hallway Angela had walked down that night. She stared at the vending machines, quiet. Then she walked up to them, touched the edge, and cried. She said she could feel something, a presence, warm 1 second, ice cold the next. She swore she heard Angela's voice just for a breath. Just long enough to make her knees buckle. One of the nurses who stayed late, Miriam, who had trained with Angela, began sleeping at the hospital, too afraid to walk to her car alone. She kept telling people she heard humming from that hallway. Not music, just humming. A lullaby, maybe, or a prayer. But she could never find the source. She stopped humming it altogether. After the night, she finally got brave and walked to the vending machine at 2:06 a.m., determined to prove there was nothing there. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just walked back to the nurse's station, sat down, and asked someone else to clock her out. When someone finally asked what she saw, she said, "She looked right at me." But her eyes weren't her eyes. They were glass, like doll's eyes. And her mouth didn't move when she spoke. Spoke? Yes, Miriam said. She asked me if I wanted to stay with her. Said there was room? Room? Behind the wall. 2 months later, the hallway was closed for renovations. But it wasn't budgeted. There were no real updates being done. The machines were removed. The lights in that hall were left off. Security stopped reviewing footage from that wing unless something violent happened. But strange things still occurred. News staff, those who didn't know the story, started reporting dreams. Always the same dream. A hallway lit in sickly green. A vending machine whirring louder than it should. And a nurse standing just at the edge of the frame. Always smiling. Always waiting. Asking if you want something to eat. One nurse swore she woke up from the dream with a plastic hospital spoon clenched in her hand. One of the cheap ones they only stocked in Mercy West. Angela's case remains open. Marcos left town. Her locker still sits sealed, badge clipped to the inside, shoes left where she stepped out of them, just like she was about to change and never did. Some say they still hear the squeak of her solace after midnight. Others say the badge scanner at the exit still flashes green now and then, like someone's trying to clock out. But never does. No one ever figured out what stepped out from behind. That vending machine. No one knows how it got there or where it went. But some nights, just past 2 a.m., if you're unlucky enough to be walking that hallway, you'll swear you feel someone behind you. And if you turn around fast enough, you might just see a nurse with a tired smile, still trying to find her way home, or pull someone else in. Just for company. Just so she's not alone behind the wall. Forever. The wind across the desert west of Marfa has a way of carrying things, sound, dust, stories. The old abandoned church out past the cattle fence near FM 169 was one of those places. Folks didn't talk about unless they'd had too much to drink, or were trying to spook their cousins during a nighttime drive. It had no name anymore, just the church, and everyone in Presidio County knew which one you meant. St. Jerome's had long since crumbled at the edges. The roof sagged. Whitewashed walls had peeled into pale strips, and its iron bell had been silent since Reagan was in office. But the cross still stood crooked atop the tower like a cracked tooth in an old man's mouth. And sometimes, just sometimes, you'd see a car parked out there late at night. No one ever said what they were doing there. No one asked her name. Was Emily Arroyo, 16. Good grades, polite. She was the kind of girl who wore her hair in a braid and carried her Bible like it weighed more than a gallon of milk. She helped serve food at the mission center and always volunteered to sweep. After youth group, the red hoodie was her favorite. Her mom said she'd had it since middle school, worn thin but soft like something sacred. She left the house a little after 6 that evening, waving goodbye from the porch and calling out that she wouldn't be long. Her mom, Elena, remembered that clearly because she'd been on the phone with her sister, and she'd paused mid-sentence just to wave back. She could still see the reflection of Emily's smile in the kitchen window. The last known sighting was at the Alsop's gas station on the edge of town. The clerk said she came in for a bottle of peach Snapple and left $1 on the counter. Didn't wait for change. smiled, polite as ever, and said she was heading to the old church. That part made no sense to anyone. Youth group wasn't at St. Jerome's, it hadn't been for years. The real group met at Grace Baptist, all fluorescent. Lights and metal folding chairs and donuts from the Safeway. Why she'd go out to the abandoned one, no one knew. Some folks whispered that maybe someone texted her to meet there. Others said maybe she was just feeling drawn to pray alone. But if you believe the older ones in town, the ones who remember, what happened in '81? You don't go near that church after sundown. They didn't find her car until the next morning. A red Corolla, neatly parked in the gravel turnoff, no sign of a struggle. Her phone was in the Q folder, screen black. Doors locked. Keys in the ignition but turned off. It was Deputy Garza who went in first. The double doors creaked even. Though the air was still, and the moment he stepped inside, something cold touched the back of his neck. He'd swear it to this day. It was like ice water sliding down his spine. The church was empty. No footprints in the dust. No raccoons or birds nesting in the rafters. Just rows of splintered pews and shafts of light through broken stained glass. But on the front pew, resting neatly on the cracked wood, was Emily's Bible. The pages were open to Psalms. Psalm 91, the one about protection from evil. Her name was written on the inside cover in purple pen, but that wasn't the strange part. The candles. Every single candle along the walls, the ones in the iron holders, were lit, freshly, and not with old matches or half-burned wax. These were white and tall and clean, as if they'd just been brought from the altar at a real living church. They flickered gently, even though there was no draft. Garza radioed in, hand shaking, and just as the words left his mouth, the organ in the back let out a single hollow note. Not a tune. Just one long breath of sound, as if someone had pressed a key and held it. Then silence. Nothing moved. No echo. Just that awful, vibrating stillness. They searched the place for hours. Brought in dogs, drones, even a thermal imaging. Rig from Fort Davis. Nothing. Not a scrap of clothing. Not a footprint out the back. Not a trace of blood. Emily was gone. As if she'd stepped into the stone itself and been swallowed. The official story was missing person under investigation. The town knew better. They said the church had taken her. Then came the calls. It started 3 nights later. A 911 dispatch out of Alpine received a call just after 2 a.m., no voice at first. Just a low, warbling sound like wind through pipe metal. Then the girl's voice, clear, soft. I'm still here. Please, don't let them close the door. The dispatcher, a woman named Renee, tried to trace the call, but it routed from a landline registered to a location that didn't exist anymore. An old caretaker's shack behind the church that burned down in 1993. The fire marshal at the time ruled it electrical. They buried the remains of the last caretaker, Father Madrid, in the cemetery behind the chapel. But that shack had been gone 30 years. After that, calls came every few nights, same time. Same voice, always brief. Sometimes just her whispering. A verse once it was John 14-6, another time it was Job 10:21. Sometimes it was a plea. I can see them in the walls. They said I have to stay. One night, just the word cold repeated over and over until the call ended. None lasted longer than 20 seconds. None could be traced. But Renee recorded them all, and she swears it's Emily's voice. Her mother listened once and collapsed on the kitchen floor. Said it wasn't just her daughter's voice, it was her daughter's breathing. The little hiccup she used to make when nervous. The faint lisp she'd never outgrown. There was no doubt that no one will go near the church now, not even kids on dares. They tried sealing the doors, boarding the windows, but someone or something keeps opening them. Candles appear lit again some mornings. A Bible with no name inside was found 2 weeks ago, open to Revelations, and the organ? It plays on its own. Just one note. Never the same key. Always at 2:19 a.m., some say it's the church. Remembering. Others think it's a doorway, thin and cracked, and Emily stepped too close to the edge. They wonder if she was ever meant to go to youth group that night, or if the church had called her like it does from time to time when it's quiet and the desert wind stops blowing and the stars go cold above Marfa. If you drive that way now, even during the day, you'll feel it. A kind of pressure in the air, like a breath being held. And you might see her, just for a second. A girl in a red hoodie, standing at the edge of the gravel lot, hands folded like she's waiting for someone. But she never moves. And if you blink, she's gone. Just the sound of the organ trailing behind, deep and lonely, like it's playing for a funeral that hasn't happened yet.